And if it turns into like an absolute debacle, then we'll reassess the situation. Maybe we can do it on another day.
Yeah.
But basically, lately I've been looking at layer 2 technologies as well as on top of Bitcoin, and trying to achieve privacy, at least in the setting up of the multi-sig contract, etc. But I'm starting to reach a point where it's becoming a little bit depressing about the amount of fucking hoops one needs to jump through in Bitcoin to achieve like even a mediocre of privacy. And during my explorations, your blog was one of the resources I came across. And I started reading. I thought, okay, this fella seems like this, yeah, sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Hopefully, it comes across that way.
So it would be great to hear your sort of background and, yeah. Well, hopefully it comes across because of this bloody thing. So yeah, I'd love to hear your background and how you got into this field specifically. Specifically, I think you also had a bit of a background in Bitcoin, and now you've sort of moved to Monero or something like that. I'd love to hear this story. Bang on.
Yeah. I feel like it's a relatively standard one initially. I basically was working in information security, and that kind of had started me thinking about privacy a little bit, but not really too concerned with privacy, not really too concerned with cryptocurrency or what that could mean. Hadn't really fallen down that rabbit hole yet. And then towards the end of 2017, I think it was right after SegWit 2x failed. I think that's the right one. Bitcoin's price, I think, dropped a little bit, and coworkers were just talking about it, just talking about making money off of it. They'd put some money into Bitcoin before, and kind of got me interested in the idea, but purely just from that kind of number go up, I want to make some money perspective. Seemed like an interesting, kind of like a penny stock investment, something I could throw some money at and see what happened. And yeah, I got started right there, I guess it was right before Bitcoin's big jump to 20K. And then it started crashing a bit, and altcoins started running in like February of 2018, I think. And I just kept kind of dabbling, getting into, I fell for all of the noob traps. I made a Twitter thread that ended up being really popular a few weeks back, just kind of walking through all of the mistakes I made along the way, or not all of them, some of the mistakes I made along the way, getting into cryptocurrency. And I fell for all that. I can buy more of this coin, so it's going to make me more money, or it must be more interesting, or kind of fell for the Litecoin as Bitcoin's testnet thing of like the value is in Litecoin, and since you can have more of it, it's going to be the future. Unfortunately, I did put some money into Tron at one point. I'm terribly ashamed of that. Those were some dark days. Explored Verge a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, dude.
Yeah,
I went really far up there, man.
I went way down the dark path of scams. Essentially, really, there's nothing really interesting about those coins, technically or fundamentally or anything really. But along the way, I kind of started to figure out like, hey, like this stuff, they have like these fancy white papers, and this was white paper season. Everybody had a white paper that described how their coin would take over the future and everything would change because of it. And so I started just kind of trying to take my technical background and dig through the white papers and see like, is there anything to this? And the more I actually read and learned about these coins and these projects, I just started to realize like they're massively pre-mined. There's no real future for this. Like, we don't need a supply chain coin. Like, maybe blockchain has some vague usage in supply chains, but like, we don't need a coin for that. And started to kind of realize there's some good fundamental things in the space, but there's also just a lot of trash. And so I started to try to sift through and see where I ended up. And I made that inevitable curve of like Bitcoin and then just into everything else and then coming back to Bitcoin and starting to realize again, I think there's something special here. Like there's something special about hard money. There's something special about a very secure network. And at that time, I thought there's something very special about privacy and at least pseudonymity. I mean, I kind of fell for the idea that Bitcoin provided strong privacy to people because I had heard about it being used in darknet markets and had seen some of the tools like Wasabi at that time, I think was a little bit more circulating among the group that I followed and chatted with. So started to see like, hey, I think we need privacy around this, but like not really getting it, but digging in a little bit more. And just for fun, as part of that, I got into mining. Just I like the concept. I've always loved physical hardware. I've always loved building things. So I wanted to get into mining and kind of see what that was about. And at the time, really all the profit was in Ethereum, and then Monero was a big coin that you could mine at home. And at that point, it was GPU mined. And so I got a GPU rig. I paid so much money for that thing. It was like the height of mining fever. I think I paid like, I don't know, $600 a GPU or something. It was ridiculous.
Did you make your money back though?
I did, actually, amazingly. I stuck with it for a while and I made it back in the long run. But that was only really because I didn't sell then. And so the coins that I kept along the way ended up being worth enough to get my money back. But it was certainly not the most profitable move. But I think the thing that I learned was it was a really good chance to get into the technicals of projects and learn more about like what is mining, how does it work, how am I actually helping to secure the network. It started up a lot of good conversations with people in real life, and it was the first time I really dove into a community just because I had no idea what I was doing. So I jumped into the Monero mining subreddit and jumped into IRC, which the Monero community loves IRC for some reason, even though it's a horribly ancient protocol, but it works.
Don't diss IRC. Don't diss IRC.
I'm a Matrix shill now, so be prepared. I like what IRC has done, but I feel like Matrix is a lot more approachable these days. But hey, it's bridged with IRC, so you IRC people can still hang out there.
No, I don't do IRC much these days. Actually, I don't do much chatting at all. Just like communities irritate me. Just generally, they irritate me. There's always retards.
Even the good communities it's stressful. Yeah. Man. Just dealing with, I mean, communities are hard, especially decentralized projects.
Yeah.
It's a mess nonstop. I will say though, like the reason I ended up being interested in privacy at all, and I had like this vague notion of like, hey, I want to be private, but I wasn't doing anything about it. Using Facebook, using Twitter actively, not caring about anything that I did, using Windows. And the real reason I started to kind of fall down the privacy rabbit hole alongside cryptocurrency was because of the Monero community. There were just a lot of people within the community that took me under their wing and kind of took the opportunity to walk me through like why privacy matters, and like at a far bigger scope than Monero. Like that, they were just saying like, yes, Monero has privacy, but they walked me through so much more about why privacy matters on an individual level, why it matters as a human right, how it affects societies when there's a lack of privacy, and it really helped me to start kind of like working my way through what does that mean for me, what does that mean for cryptocurrency, and really started me kind of down the path towards, I don't know what I would call myself, I guess a privacy advocate or just someone who's trying to learn and share along the way. But I think I've fallen more and more into the rabbit hole of privacy is extremely important, and it is constantly being aggressively stripped away from us. And it's trying to figure out what can I do to reclaim it for myself, and what can I do to help others reclaim it for themselves too. So.
Yeah, I think to sum it up in a nice way, like there was a tweet from Fluffy Pony, which was like, when you go into the public bathrooms and you sit down and you close the door behind there, you close the door not because you're conspiring against the government. It's because you want a bit of privacy as you take your shit on the pot, right? I mean that sort of sums it up, really.
Yes, some great simplifications of what privacy.
Oh yeah, he does.
Yeah.
From time to time, I'm sure it's rather South African crass, but so
Lost you for a
rich
second there.
people. Oh, did you? Sorry.
We're good now. We're good now.
So, yeah, it's like I'm apologizing as if it's my fault. Anyway, so what I found is that I don't think I really start to wonder whether we will ever see Monero privacy levels reach Bitcoin, and I say this for this reason. Rich people like to have pissing contests with other rich people in the form of, look at my artwork, look at my series of vehicles, vintage vehicles, look at my properties, look how many Bitcoin I've got. So it's basically this rare sort of essentially collectible that's sort of come into cyberspace, which makes it a lot easier for people in general, but especially rich people, because they can just sweep their profits onto the Bitcoin. So all round, it just plays very well into the modus operandi of rich people. But when it actually comes to like cash and spending stuff online, it's just not there. It's just not there. So, did you ever look into building stuff on top of Bitcoin, or were you just like straight into the Monero stuff?
Yeah, I mean,
what's your thoughts on that that little thing I had to say about Bitcoin?
I see that as the narrative that has overtaken Bitcoin. I don't necessarily agree that is what Bitcoin is fundamentally, or what it has to be. But I definitely think that digital gold narrative, that hard capital cost narrative, has kind of become the rallying cry that Bitcoiners use to get institutional investors and regulators and financial institutions on board and interested in Bitcoin. And to be completely honest, I feel like that's probably why Bitcoin is worth as much as it is today in dollar terms. And that's fine, but I've said this a lot on Twitter and other places, but I don't think the world needs another investment vehicle. Like, there are plenty of ways for us to put money into something and make money over the long term. Obviously, Bitcoin has outperformed everything over the last 10 years that it's been in existence, 12 years now. And it's made a lot of people rich that wouldn't have been otherwise, or that didn't have a lot of money and wouldn't have been like putting tons of money into a 401k over time, or those kind of approaches to securing wealth long term. But I think the world loses something fundamental if Bitcoin continues to go down this digital gold path. And I think it's sad because the network effect that Bitcoin has is so massive, and especially because the buy-in with financial institutions, banks, governments, like, they're starting to get on board with the general concept. There's a lot of negative that comes with that as well, as I talked about on Twitter today with the compliant mining pool. You're going to see a lot more talk about fungibility issues, a lot more compliant pools, compliant exchanges, compliant merchants, people who are unwilling to mine or transact with Bitcoin that are deemed dirty or tainted. But I think because of the network effect that Bitcoin has, it really has the potential to be a strong change for good for the world. But I don't see digital gold as something that will change the world for the better. It's, at this point, it seems like it's just being co-opted back into the legacy banking system, back into regulators' hands, and it's just becoming another commodity that's going to be just absorbed, which I don't think is super helpful. And I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think Bitcoin was designed to be that, and I don't think that it has to be that way.
Yeah. So you're referring to the fungibility aspect of Bitcoin in this sense. Now, I asked this question like many years ago, like I don't know, 2011, 2012, when Bitcoin was still a bit of a novelty, right? Like we would like send loads of Bitcoin to each other just because we could, right? I happened to throw away a hard drive with some Bitcoin on it, and somebody mentioned to me. He said it was Barry. He said, at what point does Bitcoin actually become? What point does Bitcoin actually have to reach before you start to seriously consider going through the trash tip, right? Looking for that hard drive, and then at like what price do you actually do it? You see what I mean? So Bitcoin, yeah, sure. It's had a little bit of a tainted history. We can prove that some Russian mafia, did some dodgy shit with that Bitcoin. But it's still Bitcoin, right? And it's like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just sweep it in there, even though we know there's an element of dodginess associated with it.
And I think, that flies in some scenarios. Like if you're just transacting with a cypherpunk who doesn't care, they're probably going to be fine. They're not going to care what the history of Bitcoin is. But the main places that people are using Bitcoin and engaging with it are centralized exchanges. Now they're through things like GBTC, which is just synthetic Bitcoin, at least at this point. They're doing it with merchants who are doing chain analysis on incoming transactions. They're stacking sats through Cash App, and they're doing all of these things through KYC entities that have regulatory pressure. And we've seen time and time again. I have a post on my blog that for a little bit of shits and giggles called the Bitcoin fungibility graveyard, but it's essentially it's really interesting. It is terrifying and interesting at the same time. But I've basically just been trying to compile instances where the lack of fungibility within Bitcoin has affected real people. And so far I have, I think, 25 confirmed instances where people have either, and this is by no means exhaustive. These are things that I've caught, and then like some of my followers have caught on Twitter and Reddit and that kind of thing. So I'm sure there are many more instances of this happening, but these are the instances that I've specifically found and been able to confirm in one way or another. But we're already seeing lots of people who are just trying to use Bitcoin, sending it to an exchange, getting their account flagged at best, getting their account completely closed, getting their Bitcoin confiscated. We're seeing people who have had exchange accounts open for years. Eventually, 3 years, like one guy, I think it's 3 years later, he moved some funds that he had on the exchange to Join Market, to do some coin joining on Join Market, and his account gets flagged, even though the Bitcoin that he actually used for that had been off the exchange for multiple years. And we've seen like the compliant mining pool that mined its first block today. That's another fungibility issue where, because one Bitcoin is not equal to one Bitcoin, there are differences because they each have a history. We're seeing that now even miners are going to start deciding this is a good transaction, this is a bad transaction, and I'm only going to mine the good transactions. So I think there is this level that Bitcoin is fungible if you're transacting with the right person. But the problem is the protocol should be able to hide the history of outputs so that whoever you're transacting with doesn't matter. They shouldn't be able to tell, oh, this went through White House Market, or this went through some DNM back in the day, and I see you bought weed on a darknet market 5 years ago with this output, and you're just moving it now to try to pay me. I'm actually going to freeze your account, I'm going to lock you out, and I'm going to need you to give me your KYC info, your bank records, all of this information to get your Bitcoin back. And that, it just shouldn't be possible at the protocol level. Yeah. And it's something that can be fixed. It's something that can be fixed today. We have the tools have been tested for a long time, and like Monero, for instance, there are ways to fix it. But I think to me, it's the biggest issue facing Bitcoin right now, is fungibility, because it affects so many aspects of what Bitcoin means, what you can do with Bitcoin, what you can't do with Bitcoin.
Yeah. So one thing I'm as I've gotten longer in the tooth, specifically with programming and whatnot, I always look at something and I think, okay, are we as maybe young software engineers, maybe we get too eager about a problem, you see, and we start to rat hole on it. We start to get, because we've got to want to flex a bit of muscles here, and we want to solve problems, and we think up something that actually is a problem, where actually it might not be a problem. I'm also playing devil's advocate. So, in a case, for example, Bittrex, I know I now no longer use Bittrex because they pissed me off. I was going to move in about a rather large amount of freshly minted what's it, ICO Tezos coins. They're like generation 0. They're block 0. No history. Fuck all history. And I was going to move it on to Bittrex, and they flagged my account, and they were like, we want to know the history, we want to know. I'm like, fuck you, bro. Fuck off. It's got nothing to do with you. It's got absolutely nothing to do with you. Like, just make the trade, damn it. And then yeah, so they flagged that, and they kicked me off the thing. So anyway, I went to Twitter and I started bitching and moaning. They seemed to allow me back on, but yeah, that kind of stuff irritates the crap out of me. So this is why I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like that, you don't get a purer history than that. These people are going to do it anyway. These it's just trusted third parties. Just trusted third parties will be intimidated to do anything. And if you can create like the similar sort of thing, like an exchange, like maybe BISC or these sorts of decentralized exchanges, that's the way of the future. So like the whole Bitcoin fungibility thing just sort of like poof disappears, because the real problem is those trusted third parties. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest pain point at this point with fungibility issues. I mean, most of the time when people are experiencing problems, it's because they're using some centralized, trusted third party that has regulatory pressure, and so they're caving into that chain analysis that's only possible because Bitcoin's not private and because there's this lack of fungibility. So they're caving into performing that analysis, flagging coins, reporting accounts, that kind of thing. And cutting them out of the picture is extremely important. And that's important no matter if the protocol itself has fungibility or not. I mean, I just don't think there's nothing that centralized exchanges do that we need long term, hopefully. I mean, they're a great on-ramp for new people into the space. Because let's be honest, like onboarding someone through BISC, something like that, it's possible, but where are most people coming in through? They're coming in through the Coinbases, the Krakens, all of the bigger centralized exchanges that make it really easy for them to get in and buy some cryptocurrency and see the number go up, that kind of thing. So that's the main pain point for fungibility right now. But I think so let's circle back to the compliant mining thing. So when there's not fungibility at the base layer, at the base protocol, yes, you see lots of issues trying to interact with the real world, obviously in quotes, but trying to interact with the outside world outside of the Bitcoin protocol. Like you're trying to pay for something at a merchant, you're trying to cash out for fiat at an exchange. You obviously see those pain points because those are the really easy gates for regulators to push. They already have pressure there. They already have really close ties with the banking system to decide if an exchange can or cannot bank. They have really easy ways to pressure those exchanges into doing what they want. So we're going to see the pressure there. But the part where I think we start to see fungibility as more than just how can I use my Bitcoin in the regular world is when we start seeing issues like this compliant mining pool issue. And this is something that I've been talking about for a while, that a lot of people in the Monero community have been talking about for a while. And some of the more privacy-focused Bitcoin community have been talking about. But it's this concept of a mining pool or a miner or a nation state that has a large amount of hash rate that decides, hey, I'm only going to mine transactions that I deem compliant. And they can only do this because they can see the history of every transaction in Bitcoin. Every output you try to spend, they can see the history of it. Hopefully you've coin joined, you've used Whirlpool, you've used something like that to hide what happened before that, but you still have the history of the coin was coin joined. I mean, you can still tell that the output went through that process, and then what you did after that, if you don't properly use coin control, they could connect things back. Obviously, there's lots of possible issues, but that censorship is only possible because they can tell outputs apart. They can see output history. And so these pools have already started popping up. I think we've had 3 pools announce that they're going to be compliant pools. And the one that mined its first block today is run by Marathon Digital Holdings, which is, I think, a pretty big investment firm and mining company. And they actually run the 7th largest mining pool in the world. And they enabled compliant mining today and started mining only compliant blocks, which their definition is basically that they won't mine like OFAC sanctioned transactions. They won't mine like known illicit transactions that are published by a government, specifically the US government. So they're going to just ignore those transactions. And if they remain a small portion of the network, ideally all that will do is just cause the people who are censored to pay a little bit more in fees and get into another block that another miner mines. And that would be an ideal world. They're a small part of the hash rate. Bitcoin can just move on. At worst, people wait a little bit longer or pay a little bit more for transactions that they want to censor. But there's also really interesting arguments to be made that anything from 10% up in hash rate, you start to see snowballing effects where the compliant pools can actually put pressure on the game theory of how Bitcoin mining works by threatening to orphan blocks, by threatening to only mine on blocks that are also compliant. And there's a lot of back and forth on how effective this would be below 51%. So that take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's some really good articles that I've shared and that I can send you that kind of walk through the 2 scenarios. But best case, basically, these pools will try to censor transactions. If they start trying to orphan non-compliant blocks, there will be this back and forth that causes the network to swing back and forth between compliant and non-compliant miners, and will cause some hiccups in block creation, in orphan blocks, that kind of thing. Worst case, these compliant mining pools get to 51%, and they have complete control of the network because they can start orphaning non-compliant blocks at will. And anyone who's a miner who has any financial incentivization, like if they need to make money at all for mining, they will have to go along and become compliant miners. And because of this lack of fungibility, this is actually possible, and it could happen. I mean, like I mentioned, this is the 7th largest mining pool in the world. I'm not sure, I think they mentioned something like 12% of the global hash rate is their goal. I'm not sure what it actually is right now. So I could be off there, but that's happening, and it's happening because of that fungibility level. And so I think that's an interesting example of how fungibility can affect people even just trying to remain within the Bitcoin protocol. So like that could affect me trying to send you money through Bitcoin directly, wallet to wallet, no intermediary. It could affect us if, for instance, you have an address that's blacklisted. And I know you can just generate a new address, but they could also blacklist outputs and say anytime that's spent, we're going to not mine that. There are other ways, but say they blacklist your address, I try to send to it because I want to donate to you, they censor that transaction. The scary thing is it's possible. It's already happening on the blockchain. Thankfully, it's a small percentage of the network at this point, but I think it's an interesting example of how fungibility can affect more than just when you try to go from Bitcoin to the real world, the kind of day-to-day world that we live in.
Scary stuff. Yeah, scary stuff. So during this process of well, anyway, I'm trying to create a. I hope we're good. All right, so I'm going to try to keep my face still to try to reduce the diff that gets sent across the wire. Save the pixels. Okay, all right. So I'm currently in the process of creating a layer 2 technology, but I've decided to create an overlay over TCP/IP to create a new sort of like content-centric network or information-centric network, and then build all the stuff on top of that. So you do all your well, at the moment it's just what, like for example, coin joining and all of that stuff would be done on top of this information-centric networking protocol. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to privacy, in Bitcoin. The only way I can see to sort of achieve this is I need ring signatures in Bitcoin. That ain't gonna happen anytime soon, ever, in Bitcoin. Therefore, this means that I need to get ring signatures of something like Monero in order to bootstrap this hash timeline contract, like this multisig, to be able to bootstrap into. So you start off in Monero land. You have a kind of decentralized BISC kind of thing where there's only a Monero Bitcoin pair. Mm-hmm. And you start off with Monero. You bootstrap this little contract. You start setting up the contracts, and then what will happen is that you end up in Bitcoin, in a hash time in the layer 2 network. You then do all your Bitcoin transactions via this layer 2, and then when you collapse back down, you end up with Monero again in your wallet. So essentially, you're piping through Monero's ring signatures, and like this is the only. Of course, when you're in the Bitcoin land, you're going to be using the Schnorr signatures, Taproot and all that good stuff, which will make it quite difficult for others to see that you're actually in layer 2 land. But yeah, can you think of anything that if it's just purely a Bitcoin solution to achieve this level of plausible deniability and privacy? Because I'm struggling, man. I'm struggling.
Yeah, I mean that's the reason. I mean, I started out as a Bitcoiner. I was a Bitcoiner for a long time, even when I was starting to work my way through Monero. When I was mining Monero, Bitcoin was 100%. That was my focus. That was what I was most interested in. Monero was just a way to make some money mining. But as I started to try to use Bitcoin more and more, I just realized it's next to impossible to achieve privacy in a way that's approachable for people. It is possible to achieve privacy on Bitcoin. I think we've seen some good attempts, like Samurai Wallet, excellent. You can do really good coin joining through that. They have really good post-mix spending tools that help you to preserve the privacy that you gain after a whirlpool round. But it's really hard to do anything outside of that, and it's hard to get into that system. It's extremely costly in time, in fees. There's just a lot there. So yeah, it's tricky. I mean, even like you mentioned wanting ring sigs in Bitcoin, you can't do that because you have a UTXO model in Bitcoin. It's like if you had ring signatures, the decoys you select are just going to be known spent later on down the line, and everyone's going to know which output is yours. You could do like confidential transactions, and that would greatly aid Bitcoin privacy if we had confidential transactions on layer 1, because then you can do like unequal amount input coin joins. You could do you can break a lot of the key heuristics by just having amounts hidden in Bitcoin. So that would be a huge step forward. I mean, that was proposed, I think 2013 for Bitcoin. That was a long time ago. And it's never going to happen. I would love to see it. I think there's a core group of Bitcoiners that are still pushing. I would love to see it, but I don't see that happening. And there's not really a way to achieve privacy for the average person on Bitcoin. And I think that's the main reasons I've kind of shifted towards Monero over the past couple of years, because I've seen that Monero's approachable privacy. It's really easy for people to get onboarded. You can use any wallet you want, and you're going to get the same privacy guarantees. You don't have to be restricted to just a single wallet. And as I've learned more and more about Layer 2, because I was initially super excited about Lightning Network. I tested it, I think, starting in 2019. I started using it quite a lot, ran my own node, open channel, started to do some routing, tested it out a good bit, bought some stickers. I love the concept, and it when it works, it feels amazing because it's relatively private. It's obviously incredibly fast, even though once you learn how finality works, there's no finality at the moment. You're just hoping that later on you can settle down, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of caveats, but it feels really great when it works. It provides much better privacy in some circumstances than base layer Bitcoin. And there are a lot of caveats there, but it's a really fascinating network. There's a ton of brilliant people working on it, a lot of money being poured into Lightning Network. So I love the idea of it, but I think the more that I saw how trying to build a layer 2 network on top of a expensive and non-private base layer, those problems just compound. I think a lot of times you hear people talking about how like Bitcoin base layer, it is what it is. It's not going to change. So we'll just build in all the things we need to fix later on in higher layers. But those layers' security and oftentimes their privacy depend on the base layer. So building those things on top don't just magically solve your problems. The problems still exist. You're just abstracting them a little bit, and you still have to settle back in the same way. I would love to see layer 2s built out on Monero or something similar, because it provides a much more approachable base, lower fees, better privacy. It's a little bit more complex because like you don't have hash time lock contracts in Monero. There's a really good paper on how to do the Lightning Network anyways that has some different security trade-offs because you don't have HTLCs. But it'll definitely
what do you have instead then?
So the proposal
how do you do this on top of Monero?
Yeah. The proposal in the paper is really interesting. So basically, so there's basically two approaches to building out something like the Lightning Network. It's more generic than Lightning Network, but we can just use Lightning Network as an example. The first approach is actually changing the signature aggregation method within Monero, changing the protocol to something called DLSAG instead of CLSAG. And basically that would just allow you to create something resembling an HTLC and provide a similar approach to Bitcoin. That signature aggregation method has some other issues with linkability and would cause some potential fungibility issues. So it wasn't chosen. It's an option, like we could change to it, and we would have to find better solutions on how to resolve the other issues that come along with it. But the other approach that was more recently proposed, I think it was November 2020, is essentially using a form of proof of work to actually secure the channels. And so your node does specific computations that are hard enough to overcome by an adversary with more compute that you would have time to close out the channel if it was being attacked. There's definitely some security trade-offs there as opposed to using HTLCs, because you aren't guaranteed in the same way to be able to settle back to the base layer. If there was an attacker and you were offline, there's a chance if they had a ton of compute, they could use their compute and leverage it to steal the funds in the channel. So there's definitely some caveats there. I haven't read the paper in a while, so I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but the focus of it was how to do channel-based networks without changing the Monero protocol and without introducing any fungibility issues. So that could go live today. Like you could build that network on Monero right now. You don't need any protocol changes, nothing. But obviously those different security trade-offs. So.
Okay, so in that sort of attack scenario, I would deliberately try to engage with a known wealthy individual, try to get into some sort of like a transaction, and then I'd do some sort of like an attack on them by running like a proof of work attack on that layer on L2 to try to sort of brute force my way through this. And compromise their okay.
Yeah, basically that's the way that you could attempt to steal funds from channels. And I mean the same caveats apply that you could use the private node, you could use private channels, you could have a reputation system for accepting or not accepting channels, that sort of thing. So there are other approaches to limiting those attacks, just like Lightning has those same approaches. I mean there's a lot of existing problems on Lightning. And normally the core solution is just use a private node with private channels, but that defeats a lot of the purpose of Lightning. If everybody's using private nodes and private channels, it becomes this large permission network that likely just has a couple hubs, which then strips the privacy and the censorship resistance if that happens. So,
Yeah, no, you would definitely want to have this sort of like a open sort of network, so I can be able to send stuff around. Networking tends to behave in a much more amenable and friendly way when I can just access your identity and like send stuffs to you or your particular address if it's a point-to-point communication system. Mm-hmm. So you definitely want to keep those features in that system.
And even in that scenario, like merchants, you would just have a channel with them. Like if you regularly shop at 5 places, you could just have a private node, private channels, and you would just open channels with those merchants that you trust, or at least trust enough that you're not too worried. So there are definitely still advantages, even if you used a wholly private node, private channel Lightning Network. You could still use it as just a peer-to-peer layer 2 and not this broad global network. But that does remove a lot of the helpfulness, because then like you go to a new place, how are you going to pay them? You're going to sit there, open a channel, wait for it to settle on layer 1, get their information.
Wait 1 moment.
Yeah. And then like, oh, but look how fast it was now. Yeah.
Now it's fast.
Yeah, that wouldn't work very well. You have to plan everywhere you're going, open your channels beforehand. And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that would not be a fun world. We definitely need a public layer 2 network at the core, at the very least, and then we can rely on other things. But those attack vectors are very different in that kind of network, because it's essentially a proof of work channel rather than an HTLC bound channel. So very different security assurances. And definitely not, I would say HTLCs are preferable, but they're not possible on Monero right now, and they're not possible without protocol changes.
What would need to happen to Monero's protocol for that to happen, for HTLCs to be brought into Monero?
The only approach I know of is implementing that DLSAG signing method within Monero, and that's what's used for the ring sig portion. And you could do that. The main reasons we wouldn't is, like I said, there are some issues with linkability within DLSAG, and it presents some other issues. And the other side one is we're trying in the Monero community to push towards a more scalable protocol. Monero is constantly iterating, constantly trying to figure out how can we keep improving and keep becoming more efficient. And part of that is moving to a new signing mechanism. Right now, the proposed one is Triptych, which will essentially be logarithmically scaling rather than linearly scaling as far as ring size goes. So you can have far more decoys without actually increasing transaction size. And if you did DLSAG instead, because it's an either or situation, like if you did DLSAG, you would still have that linear ring size scaling. So you would be very limited in what kind of per transaction anonymity set you could provide. And anonymity size is very nuanced topic, but it still would limit how each transaction could protect itself, and in the future could cause some problems. So we definitely want to move to a more efficient signing method so that we can expand the ring size and provide more privacy to everybody on the network over time, or just make it more efficient. The other approach is you could just barely bump ring size and have a much more efficient transaction. But
yeah, what's your outlook on L2 stuff now?
I think it's a hugely needed area of research. I think I think I kind of fell into the Bitcoin Cash camp for a while. Not like technically, like I was never like working on Bitcoin Cash or using it, but just the idea that
scammers, don't you?
I have, the more I talk about the things that I like in Monero, the more people start calling me a Bitcoin Cash shill, just because there are definitely some similarities and concepts there, but I am not a Bitcoin Cash person in any way. But the thing that I think I initially thought was, we'll just do everything at L1. Like, once I got through Bitcoin, I realized like, hey, L1's not scalable, and I was like, oh, Lightning Network. But then I started to find all of the issues that Lightning Network has, and a lot of those are still just unresolved, and there's a lot of core potential issues. I started going, well, let's just use L1 for everything. We'll just need a pretty scalable network, and we'll make it work. But if these things achieve the scale that I'm sure all of us would love to see, it's just not, you can't have everyone doing their coffee transactions on a base layer that has to be stored for all time by every network participant. Like, it's not possible. So we need layer 2s. There's a lot of really good research going on. Obviously, Lightning Network is the one that people know the best, and it's the one that's the most in use. I would love to see it keep progressing. It feels like it's one of those things where it's like it's going to be perfect just around the corner, and it just keeps getting pushed out. And just watching people go through struggles trying to use it. I mean, just watching people on Twitter constantly hitting all of these massive roadblocks in UX and having routing issues and having to deal with how different wallets handle things and different nodes handle things. There's a lot of complexity there, and I understand things don't move super quickly, but I think Ellen's been around for 4 years now. And it doesn't seem like there's been a ton of progress, but there are a lot of really smart people working on it, so I'm hopeful for that. There's obviously lots of other work going on, like drive chains, state chains. There's a lot of interesting other approaches to layer 2s. And these are very different. They generally involve either burning funds or atomic swapping into the network. Drive chains are probably the one it seems the most feasible, but it requires changes to the Bitcoin.
What the hell a drive chain?
I should be more prepared to talk about them. I'm just learning about them now myself. I'm trying to kind of figure out what other approaches there are outside of Lightning. There is a really good podcast episode. I think it's the Unhashed podcast. And Eric Wall and I think Ruben Somson talked about layer 2s across both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I learned a lot of things that I had no idea existed, because I heard of drive chains probably a year and a half ago. And apparently they've been being worked on for a long time, but they require some protocol changes to Bitcoin to work properly. I think it's BIP 300 and 301, if I remember correctly, have to be implemented. But once they can function as layer 2 networks where you deposit funds, and then they can do a lot of different things. I think one of the most recent ones that looked very interesting was someone had created a Zcash drive chain. And so they had taken Zcash's privacy technology and put it into a drive chain network. And they were showing it off against testnet, obviously, but they could deposit funds into the drive chain, and then use them as if it was Zcash. They could shield funds, they could unshield funds, they could transfer them around within the drive chain. I'm not well versed in the security assurances around drive chains and other chains like that. There's a lot of different approaches that are being explored, but I don't think really are being built out. I think drive chains is probably the only one outside Lightning Network for Bitcoin that I know is like being actively explored, and there are ways to implement it today. I think everything else pretty much is just in a kind of a research, like, hey, you could do this state. Like state chains is another one. I'm trying to think of the others. But they basically provide different assurances, different ideals. They're more like they're a side chain, not really a layer 2. Like we think of Lightning Network as more of a layer 2 because you're locking Bitcoin in, but it's still Bitcoin at the base layer. You're just passing around IOUs. Whereas a drive chain would be you're minting coins on a different chain by depositing Bitcoin. And so it has those different trade-offs. But you can have a totally different consensus mechanism. You can have totally different block times. You can have all of those changes. It just can't be like a very advanced chain, as far as I know, if you're going with something like that. And then in Ethereum, there's lots of work being done on potential side chains, potential layer 2 networks. A lot of that is only possible because of Ethereum's statefulness, because they have the EVM and smart contracts. You can do a lot more advanced layer 2s, which is nice. Obviously, that comes with all the caveats that Ethereum has with scaling and costliness and other centralization risks. But there's some really cool approaches being built out there. Especially, there's some interesting privacy-focused layer 2s being built out that could be pretty cool. But those couldn't really come to Bitcoin or Monero or anything like that because we don't have any kind of smart contract, no EVM, nothing like that. So yeah, I try to stay up to date. I try to see what's going on. But like I said, I think Lightning Network is probably the one that's most viable today and definitely has the most resources behind it. Like a lot of resources behind it. So I'm hopeful that will continue to evolve and they'll work out the kinks, and the research being done on the failings of Lightning Network will drive developers to find good solutions. But I also, as I've talked about, I'm not sure layer 2s work very well on Bitcoin when the security assurances rely on the Bitcoin base layer for settlement. We can get into that if you want or not, but
I do actually.
Yeah. So this has been, I think, a recent trend. I've seen a lot of Bitcoiners talking about this concept that, especially when we had this big fee spike in Bitcoin, when all of the miners in, I don't know how to pronounce the territory, so I'm not going to try, but all these miners in a certain area of China were shut down. There you go. That sounds right. I'll go with that.
Sounds legit. Or Xinjiang. I don't know which one.
That sounds like how I think it should be pronounced, but I won't copy you. But yeah, when that territory was shut down for an inspection, I guess was the end result of what was happening, and all those miners got shut down. We lost 25 to 30% of the Bitcoin hash rate, and fees obviously went through the roof. I was constantly looking. There were like 850 megabytes of transactions piled up, just waiting to be mined and included in blocks. Fees were like 150 sats per vbyte, 200, 250. There were a lot of issues with people getting transactions through. And as part of that, I saw a lot of people shift this narrative that Bitcoin fees are going to perpetually go up, like they will always be rising. And there's something to be said for the narrative as truth, because Bitcoin's base layer relies on transaction fees long-term for network security. There will be no block subsidy later on down the road. Obviously, that's a long ways out. It's probably beyond our lifetimes. But that is, the security assurances of the network rely on fees 100% down the line. And because of that, you need a strong fee market. How much you need in fees is obviously the part where it's hard to say what will be necessary down the line. But as part of that, and as part of the, in my opinion, artificially restricted block size, you have quite high fees on the base layer already. And in my opinion, it's pretty early. So having those high fees, you try to build a layer 2 network on it. But these layer 2s, like I'll just use Lightning Network as an example. These layer 2 networks rely on settling back to the base layer to resolve disputes. The base layer acts as the arbitrator for anybody that's having an issue with layer 2, which is great when you can settle and when settling is cheap. There's been some really interesting research. A recent paper came out about the Lightning Network that proposes an attack where you can actually, using the current parameters of the Lightning Network, and these can change, and they're also implementation dependent, but using the current parameters of the Lightning Network, you can essentially force someone's node to try to settle back to the base layer to resolve disputes so many times that they fill up block space, because you attack multiple nodes at once. You can attack so many that they fill up the block space, and the fees that they've set up in advance to pay for closing the channel in case of a dispute are not enough to pay for it anymore. And the attacker can wait and can publish a transaction that pays for the parent and takes the funds on the channel. So it's essentially a method where you can DOS a set of nodes by filling up block space and then steal funds because they can't settle back. They literally cannot, it's not even a fee problem, but they just literally cannot settle back to the base layer because you fill blocks. And as I was going through that, I was a little late to the paper. I think it's a few months old now, but as I was going through that was when this big fee spike hit. And I started to think about the implications of Lightning security if the fee market in Bitcoin is extremely high. And like during this fee market, it was consistently, I should have done the numbers on how much it would cost to actually close a non-cooperative channel during that fee crisis. I'm not sure exactly how much it would be, but it got me thinking more about how things actually work when you have a very high fee base layer and you're using it for a layer 2. And just as an example, let's say you have a $1,000 channel and settling back to the base layer costs $100 right now. Okay, you'll eat that cost to get back your $1,000 in case of someone attacking your channel or your node. That's fine. You get $900 back. But what happens when fees continue to rise? Your Bitcoin is still locked in Lightning, and fees get so high that the cost to settle the non-cooperative close is more than the amount in the channel, or even just a significant portion. Is it worth it for you to close the channel at that point? No. Because if you're going to have to pay more funds than you're going to get back through the channel close, those funds are either going to be locked in that channel forever, unless fees drop again, or the person who's attacking you is going to steal the funds because they can use the funds within the channel to reimburse themselves. But most likely, the funds will just sit in a locked channel, and you won't be able to use them. And a lot of the security assurances of Lightning rely on that ability to settle back to the base layer effectively and quickly in order to keep your funds. Because, as we know, within Lightning Network, you're passing around IOUs and you're opening this channel that involves some trust with the other person, the other node on the other end. And if things go bad, your only recourse is to settle back to the base layer and do that non-cooperative close.
There's an old saying, time and tide waits for no man. And when L2 developers, they start designing these systems, it's almost like they see the variations, the fee tidal movements of Bitcoin as the thing which is undesirable, whereas this is the actual thing that's needed. It's required. You need to have that fee pressure, and this is something that sort of became more transparent or clear to me after the discussion I had with Eric Voskuil. Are you familiar with this fella?
A bit, yeah. I don't follow him very closely.
Okay.
Listen to him a little bit.
Okay, this is a fella you want to become like, I won't say intimate with, but you can get as intimate as you can with this
familiar
guy.
With. We'll say familiar with.
He's released a book called Familiar. Oh, come on. Yeah, he's released a book called Crypto Economics, which basically goes into the fallacies and all sorts of, like, you know, the FUD and bullshit around Bitcoin. But one thing he did mention during this discussion I had with him was fee pressure needs to be exerted upwards into the L2 layer. Otherwise, L2 just becomes a shitcoin. It has to happen. You need to have that security that goes into it. This is the thing that makes Lightning useful. It's what makes it precious. I mean, in the sense that you can collapse down. Now, yeah, sure, you're going to have variations in the fee price, but that just introduces a concept of like a predator-prey cycle. I'm sure you're familiar with a predator-prey, right? Mm-hmm. So you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, fees are pretty high. Not a good time to open up a contract. And you know, when they're low is when you start to do all your creations and collapsing of contracts, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, that adds a new dynamic into the market. I don't see this argument as something that's negative, because you need the security. So Lightning and L2 needs to adjust to that. Time and tide waits for no man. That's what I mean. The boats are gonna sail when the tide is high, or in this case, when it's low.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I mean, that the Lightning Network relies on the base layer for security. Like that's the security assurances, is you can settle back to the base layer. But if this tide keeps going up like this and just keeps going up, you reach a point where you have lots of orphan channels, essentially, that can't be closed out unless you do have some kind of fee event where suddenly fees are zero or low. But if they keep rising infinitely, as in some cases they need to rise forever because they have to replace the block subsidy over time, then the layer 2 becomes so costly to get onto or to resolve disputes on. How can you use it? I mean, I know that you need the security somewhere, but I think there's also this concept where people see fees as needing to be super high because that's the only way to get security. But fees, in my opinion, are really they're a spam prevention measure. They don't need to be excessively high. They need to be high enough that someone can't just produce spam and not have to pay for it in some substantial way. Okay,
and I'm glad you mentioned that. The other aspect of what Eric Voskuil introduced to me is that Bitcoin is a black market money. It is a black market. It's designed to operate in the state where the state. It's designed to operate in a situation where the state is out to attack it.
Yeah.
It thrives thrives in that environment. So like when Bitcoin gets popular, obviously the fees are going to go up.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the fees are going to go up because there's a lot more demand for it. So, but that also puts competitive pressure on state monopoly money or whatever, CBDCs of the future, or whatever it might be. So, there's always a way to sort of opt out of those systems now. So again, we're going to introduce another predator-prey cycle, or just an oscillation that's going to happen because of this dynamic between the state money and Bitcoin. So I don't think it's going to go up infinitely, because if it does keep going up infinitely, that means the state is on constant attack, and the state cannot be on constant attack, because eventually it's just going to run out of resources. It's going to print their money to oblivion, like in Zimbabwe, and everybody's going to be in Bitcoin at that stage. And then by that time, well, people will make a plan, eh? People will make a plan. Now we're starting to extrapolate quite far into the future there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely tricky. I mean, I think I definitely have different ideas of what a base layer needs to be effective. And I don't know. I generally disagree with this idea of like hyper Bitcoinization, that like it's going to force states to change their ways because of the price increase, or because of it sucking in so many assets and so much energy that it will just become this thing that destroys the state, or at least cripples the state and makes it do what we want. And I don't see that as a viable future. And I think that changes a lot of assumptions that I have about what a layer one needs to be because of that. And I see where you're coming from. I definitely see that idea that if the price just continues to increase forever, it's going to something has to give. If the dollar price of Bitcoin just keeps going up, something's going to die out, or we're just going to have a new set of rulers who are all the people who got into Bitcoin early, which would be interesting. I don't know if that'd be a good or bad thing. Yeah, I'm just gonna walk past that one. But I think a lot of it just stems from a different worldview, and I think that I see that a lot in the Monero community compared to the Bitcoin communities. I think there's a lot more of this ethos of crypto anarchy, and this idea that we need to build digital states and digital communities that can exist despite the government being oppressive, and despite the government wanting to shut us down, and despite the government wanting complete control and complete surveillance. So I think the Monero community is more focused, and obviously I'm speaking for a community that has differing views, so there are going to be people that fall on both sides, but like I'll just speak to my specific ethos. But my ideal is, what we need out of a cryptocurrency is we need something that allows us to transact, trade, pass value in a way that the state cannot surveil or stop. And those are the focuses. I don't think we need this thing that the dollar value goes up all the time. I don't think that there's a way that Bitcoin just destroys the state, or a cryptocurrency destroys the state. I don't think that they would allow that to happen, and I think they have the tools that they need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I think my obviously differing view is more of a crypto anarchy view of we need to build tools that allow us to subvert the state underneath when necessary. I mean, there can be good states, there have been good governments over time, but when necessary, we need to have the tools at hand to do what we need to do, despite attempted censorship, despite attempted surveillance, and despite attempted crackdowns. And that really, it changes the assumptions you make about a layer one, because then you shift to, hey, privacy is the most important thing. Because if you have privacy, you have fungibility. If you have privacy and fungibility, you have something that cannot be censored, because you can't tell one transaction apart from another. So even if the state is the only miner, they can't tell what a transaction is. So they can't even censor at that level. So you automatically cut out this whole idea of like compliant miners, this whole idea of censorship by the network. Obviously, you could still have censorship at a trusted third party level. Like the government could say no business is allowed to transact in Monero. And that's something they could do. And that would be a detriment to the use case of Monero, probably a detriment to the price, but that wouldn't stop the tool from working. that would just make the tool something that is a dark, like a black market money, like you were talking about Bitcoin. It's something that thrives and does well and survives when the government tries to crack down and prevent its use. It will survive and it'll go on. It's not going to destroy the state, but it's going to allow the people who see what's going on to have a way to opt out. And so I think that view changes a lot of assumptions you make about a layer 1 and about a layer 2 and et cetera, et cetera.
You're absolutely right. So, but also, as part of the show, I do need to have an element of devil's advocate. I really do.
Yeah. No, I love
that. It kind of keeps the new spices coming in. But this is fundamentally the approach that I'm looking at, and I can tell you, I've had like real world experience from this, because as I've mentioned, I've just implemented a protocol which is designed to replace internet, IP. And as a result, when you start designing these protocols from an initial grab bag of things like security being one of them, when you realize that the current TCP/IP internet that we use has like fuck all security, it's quicksand. It's freaking quicksand. So this is why, hackers are having a field day in current internet at the moment, because all security is just patched on. So the same thing would be happening if Bitcoin were to have fungibility patched onto it. Mm-hmm. It has to be done at layer 1. Otherwise, it's just going to be like what I refer to as an architectural bug. And an architectural bug is just going to, it becomes like this massive crack in your architecture that breeds bugs. And for the rest of your life, you spend, stomping on these little cockroaches that come out of the system, whereas you should just fix the architectural bug, which is the fungibility stuff. And as a result, you can build your clean citadels on top of that. That are cockroach free, damn it. So yeah, so this is also the other reason why is because I realized that there is no security at TCP/IP level, which is layer 1 level in my particular protocol stack, and anything you do is just going to become more complex. Even Zoom is a good example of this. They built it on top of TCP/IP or UDP probably. I don't know what the stack is. But you saw how often they had these different security problems. Mm-hmm. Again, it's always patched on. So, no,
and you've seen the same thing. I was just going to say, you've seen the same thing with privacy too. This is why we've had this continual struggle with privacy in the internet. It was designed from the ground up to not be private, and that wasn't a consideration when it was built out. But it's something we've tried to patch on and patch on and patch on, and it's been tricky. And it's still a battle.
Yeah. So I was like, oh well, fuck it then. I'm just going to go to layer 1 again, start with a new layer 1, and then build up from there. It's the only way to do it in my books. Then when you do get a bug, it's a single bug that you patch on layer 1 that fixes the problem for everybody built on top of you. So it's just the right way to do it. The thing is, I don't want to be so defeatist about Bitcoin, getting changes into Bitcoin, because I think it's possible to happen. The thing is, I wonder if it's just being co-opted by rich people now.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, is it's code. People talk about this immaculate conception thing, and it's immutable, we can't change it, but it's, at the end of the day, it's code. We can change the code, we can make it into something that does what we need. And there are already things that have been proposed in the past for Bitcoin that can resolve these core issues. The core one being privacy and fungibility. And Monero has implemented many of those things that were originally proposed for Bitcoin. It can be done. I think the problem is now you have to shift the narrative, and you have to shift community sentiment, and you have to shift all the institutional investors that people were begging to get into Bitcoin for years. Yeah. And you have to shift the banks, and you have to shift these regulated exchanges to go along with this idea of implementing privacy at the base layer, and none of those people want that. Cypherpunks want privacy. Regular people normally don't want privacy. They need it. They deserve it. It's a right. but normally they don't care, that they don't want it. And the government and regulated exchanges and businesses and not businesses and banks,
Nobody wants it.
they don't want privacy, because when it's transparent, it allows them much easier control. It allows them surveillance, simple surveillance. I mean, in blockchains, even easier surveillance than in a lot of other cases. Not always, but because it's a permanent immutable ledger, they have this transaction history. They can constantly be working on new approaches to crack and to come up with ways to find privacy flaws later on too. And yeah, it just becomes this thing that is moving so fast towards what I like to call like this number go up narrative, that it's really hard to change the course of that ship at this point into a more cypherpunk, more privacy centric protocol. And I mean, really anyone you talk to in the Monero community, almost all of them started out in Bitcoin and then just became disillusioned with the inability to get core changes done and moved on. Like, and many of them are still big Bitcoin fans. They hold Bitcoin, they use Bitcoin, they advocate for changes. I mean, like I know you interviewed Fluffy Pony. He's working on the Lightning Network now, and he's stayed true to trying to change Bitcoin and trying to do what's necessary to keep it afloat. And I admire that. I have that defeatist attitude about Bitcoin. I don't see the changes happening at layer one that I think need to happen. But there are great people still working on it. I mean, Samurai Wallet and the whole community around them, I think, are really admirable. I think they've taken it upon themselves to try to do whatever they can to change narratives and to push the need for privacy at layer one. And they've built out cool tools like paynims that could be implemented at layer one and in more wallets. I mean, that it's implemented on top of layer one, but it could be implemented in more wallets. So there are still people working on it, but yeah, I think the narrative of people who stood to gain a lot, they drove this narrative of, we can make the number go up. We need institutional investors. We need banks on board. We need the state to love Bitcoin, and then number will go up. And they sold a narrative that made them wealthy, and it worked. I mean, the narrative was brilliant if you wanted Bitcoin's price to go up over time. But I think along the way, we lost something that Bitcoin could have been, and hopefully still will be. I mean, I say this all the time too, like, I would love it if we did not need Monero and Bitcoin was changed to be what we needed, and we could harness the massive network effect and social impact and name recognition that Bitcoin has, and then change it into a tool that the world needs, which is private, fungible money. I don't know that that's going to happen. But if it does, I would love that. I would ditch Monero. I would jump on the Bitcoin train, because obviously if you couple network effects with a strong protocol, you get a very powerful thing. But I think right now you have network effects latched on to what is an outdated and, from a privacy perspective, broken protocol that you can patch some stuff onto app layer and second layer, but you're always going to be fighting this battle with the protocol itself. And you're fighting all of these attack vectors that are open because the protocol has these flaws. And I think it's only going to get harder and harder to do anything that is remotely cypherpunk on Bitcoin as time progresses. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, there are times where I fantasize of just, it would be lovely for the Monero guys, all the cypherpunks that have been disillusioned with Bitcoin. You know, if we could just sort of like transplant them, and say, okay, you guys are now in control of Bitcoin. I'd really like to see that, you know, and it would be some sort of like body which really does have a sort of weight in decision making, along with the miners as well as the stakeholders of Bitcoin and whatnot. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. And as anyway, let's go into the graveyard thing.
Yeah.
Now, what inspired you to create this graveyard? And what is it, first of all? And this is another devil's advocate, sort of like introductory, I'm being a host question.
Yeah, so it's a concept I've been kind of thinking about for a while, talking with other people in Bitcoin and Monero, and just as I kind of wrestled with what fungibility means, because I mean, it's this word and concept that just no one knows what fungibility is. Like, you try to tell someone you run into on the street, like, hey, do you know what fungibility is? Like, no one knows, no one cares, because you don't have to worry about fungibility with government money, because the government just says this is fungible, and if you decide you don't want it to be fungible, you can't change that unless you change the government. So it's something where, like, they can just enforce fungibility through law, through military, through whatever they want. And so people just haven't had to deal with this idea of, like, something that's the same isn't actually the same. Like, how does that work? And so I think I wanted to be able to convey more clearly to people what a lack of fungibility means in the real world. And as more and more issues started popping up around Bitcoin, and these they've really accelerated over the past 6 months even. Let me see, I made it initially at the end of March, so it's been not even 2 months yet, and have 25 different instances of people being affected by a lack of fungibility or by the Bitcoin blockchain being affected by it. But the post is just, the goal is not to say, like, Bitcoin is doomed, Bitcoin sucks, it's not going to happen, it's not going to work. The goal is to just open people's eyes to the issues. And I mean, the ultimate win would be if enough Bitcoiners saw, not my post, but just the general idea of fungibility as important, and said, we need to do something about this. And so the real goal is just to bring it in front of people and to let them see, like, hey, like, yes, you don't know what this word means, or yes, you've, like, heard people, the Monero community, whisper fungibility in, like, every chat room that there's a Monero guy, because we're that crazy person who just jumps into a conversation and starts screaming about privacy and fungibility and
then
all
flashes the trench coat.
Exactly. Runs away. You never even know what happened.
Yeah.
But it's more than just this, like, this word that us Monero people talk about. Like, it's a serious real world thing, and it's something that has existed forever. It's always been an issue, but governments can just override the issue. But with Bitcoin, because we don't have a government to say this is fungible, I mean, you can't rely on someone to decide Bitcoin is fungible, so just deal with it, even when there's history, even when there's taint. You have to enforce it at the protocol level. I mean, you have to do things that make it so that there cannot be taint or history associated with transactions or with outputs. And so that's really the focus. It's to outline the issue and then to show people how real world people are being affected by a lack of fungibility. Just kind of bring home that concept. And I broke it down into the reason or tool that got people into issues with fungibility. The vast majority of the issues so far have been people using mixers and centralized exchanges. And the centralized exchange doesn't like that they use a mixer. They flag their account, they shut down their account, they confiscate their Bitcoin, that kind of thing. So, I mean, like, I have 5 of the 25 instances are Wasabi users getting their accounts closed or flagged for mixing funds either before or after using the exchange. Even just sending from the exchange to a Wasabi wallet has gotten people in trouble. Because, and this is, I'm not going to get into the whole Samurai versus Wasabi debate, but there are a lot of core issues.
I don't know it, but you could. You might want to. What's the outline? The executive summary.
The outline is, Wasabi is a CoinJoin wallet for Bitcoin. So they propose that they provide privacy to their users by allowing them to mix funds with other Wasabi users through a central coordinator that, in theory, cannot see who is who. But there have been lots of, and it's hard to dissect because there's a lot of drama between Wasabi Wallet and Samurai Wallet. It gets messy. But from what I can tell after digging through everything I can find, Wasabi Wallet had a lot of issues with implementation. They had a static fee address that they used in Wasabi. So whenever you did a mix, part of the mix was the fee that you paid to be able to mix, and it went into a static address. So anyone looking at a block explorer could see this person mixed and they used Wasabi, because you can see the static fee address. So it makes everything stand out as exactly what it is, which is a Wasabi mix. And it also caused some other issues. They also had implementation issues that apparently caused a lot of address reuse. And they also had no post-mix spending tools. So you could just mix all your funds, mix your 10 Bitcoin into a bunch of smaller UTXOs, and at the end you could just send all funds. And so a lot of people were just mixing all of their funds and then just recombining them to send to their ledger or whatever, which completely defeats the whole purpose, and you gain no privacy after you do that. So there's a lot of core issues. I think it's hard to dissect. There's been a lot of drama, but Samurai Wallet is, from everything that I can tell and from talking to people that I trust. I know we're not supposed to trust people in this space, but talking to people that I trust and dissecting what I can and using both tools quite a bit, it seems like Samurai Wallet is a much better CoinJoin implementation. And by far, if you're going to use Bitcoin, use Samurai Wallet. 100%. That's really the only way I can suggest anyone use Bitcoin. And I think they do a really good job of making it relatively easy and relatively approachable. It's still very complex, but it's at least easier than a lot of other projects like Join Market. But yeah, because of those flaws within Wasabi, they could tell that a user was sending to a Wasabi wallet, and so they got their Exchange account flagged after they just sent from Exchange to Wasabi wallet, which is interesting. Samurai is not exempt from issues with fungibility, though. Recently, and it took a long time for anything to happen with Samurai Wallet users, but recently 2 different users had accounts. One had a deposit that they tried to deposit into an exchange called BottlePay, which I've never used. I'm not sure what they are, but someone was using BottlePay. They mixed friends in Samurai and they sent it into BottlePay, and BottlePay interestingly returned the funds, which they basically laundered the Bitcoin for the person because they sent them a new UTXO from their own wallet. So they got what is ostensibly a very clean Bitcoin UTXO at that point. Not saying you should do this, but in theory, if you just keep sending BottlePay your funds from Samurai Wallet, you can get a lot of nice, clean exchange UTXOs. But they returned the funds, thankfully, and just basically said, your account's closed, don't do this again. And then another person using Paxos, I don't know how to say that, their account was frozen when they tried to withdraw to Samurai Wallet and mix. So they're not exempt from it either. Even Join Market, which is, as far as I know, pretty rarely used, but it is a way to mix that I think in theory is good, but it's really hard to use. They've had an issue where a person's BitMEX account was flagged months after they withdrew into Join Market. Once they mix funds, BitMEX was monitoring the whole time, and they flagged their account right then and asked for tons of KYC info and caused lots of problems. In those cases, I mean, I don't want to necessarily go through all 25 cases on here, but that type of thing happens all the time. These are only the cases that I've seen in the wild, and I wanted to compile these so people could see real-world cases. And then the last 2 sections are ones that are more focused on how fungibility can cause problems at the protocol level. So one section is about compliant mining and virgin Bitcoin. And compliant mining is what we talked about before, where mining pools will say they'll only mine transactions they deem as good. But virgin Bitcoin is just this idea that newly minted Bitcoin that a miner collects has no history, and so it goes for a premium. Not on exchanges, but over the counter, private parties, they'll pay extra for this Bitcoin that is directly from miners. The number is 20% or very large, was someone else's quote specifically, as far as how much more people will pay. There's not a lot of confirmed cases of that. I've only found 2 that people have they've given their word that was going on a lot, but I haven't talked to anybody who actually bought or sold at a premium, outside of the one miner who said that they constantly were selling at a premium. And then the latest interesting one is Iran decided that only Bitcoin that's mined within Iran can be used within Iran, which is really it's really odd. I mean, it works in theory. They're going to have to do obviously chain analysis on every merchant that accepts Bitcoin, anybody who tries to use it, but you can tell that it was mined by a pool in Iran, so it's theoretically doable. It's just a really odd concept that only Iranian Bitcoin can be used within Iran.
Okay, so we know about the hash wars, right? We know this, as you mentioned, you only verified transactions, but now this is something that an authoritative dictatorship has gone and flipped on its head. I've not thought about that before. What are the implications? Okay, so basically, Iran is utilizing the rest. Wait, no. What are the implications now? So Bitcoin is, so you can send money. You can send Bitcoin into Iran.
No. Well, I mean, you could, but the person couldn't use it within Iran. They can only use Bitcoin that was mined, like that was from a Coinbase within Iran.
Right. Okay.
So you can't.
Okay.
They said that it is illegal to pay with Bitcoin. I think the specific one they mentioned initially was like paying for import fees or something. But then they broadened it today, I think was when they broadened it and said you can't use Bitcoin at all unless you're using outputs that were from Coinbases mined in Iran by Iranian sanctioned, like government sanctioned, approved miners. It's a possible future of a whitelisted network. Like the compliant miners that we have right now, it's a blacklist. So they're saying we're not going to mine these transactions that aren't good. But if they had a large enough network share, they could say, instead of we're only going to mine the transactions that are good, you could say, we're not even going to just drop the bad ones. We're going to have a whitelist. And if you're one of these entities, or if you're one of these addresses, or if it's one of these outputs, you can transact and no one else can transact in Bitcoin. And the fact that that's even possible is terrifying. I mean, that would require, obviously, more than 51% share of the network. So hopefully we never reach a world where a whitelisting compliant miner has that much of the hash rate. But it's possible because of this flaw in the Bitcoin base layer.
Yeah, a whitelisting compliant miner. What kind of hells is that? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no kidding. That's just, it's nightmare fuel.
Oh, jeez. All right. So what are you working on at the moment?
It really depends. I kind of try to stay flexible.
Or do you have got like a day job, or what is it?
Yeah. So I don't work in the cryptocurrency space. Maybe one day. I'm definitely open to it if the right opportunity happens. But I haven't made enough money to not have a day job and actually really enjoy my day job. So I work for a humanitarian aid nonprofit, which I'll just keep nameless for a modicum of privacy. But I do IT work for them. I'm a site reliability engineer by day for them, helping them build out, funnily enough, censorship-resistant platforms, which was what drew me there. It's really, really cool opportunity to build out platforms that are for an idea that I believe in and for a company, or not a company, an organization that matters. What?
It has to be either Amnesty or Red Cross.
Well,
anyway, it doesn't matter.
You can guess. But yeah, so that's what I do for a day job. I love that. I love the mission that I'm helping. I think it's really interesting, and the work that I'm doing itself too is interesting and technical. I'm not a developer by trade, more like a sysadmin. Is what I've done throughout my career. I worked in cybersecurity before this at a big company. But yeah, that's my day job.
So I interviewed a chap named Patrick Poon, who worked for Amnesty International. It doesn't matter. He worked for Amnesty International, and he was telling me some of the issues that are faced, that Amnesty actually faces, specifically with moving money towards people and all sorts of stuff, as well as another chap that I interviewed. His name is Thor, and like the god, and he was a representative of the was it the Dutch or the Holland? No, the Denmark Red Cross, and it was surprising to me just how much work the Red Cross does. Like, that is one insane organization, absolutely insane, and it's just like purely human oriented. Like you sailing across the Mediterranean trying to escape a country or something, and you people go out on these boats with like just a phone number, a Red Cross phone number, and a mobile phone number. As soon as they can get into some sort of connection, what they do is they phone the Red Cross. The Red Cross comes in with a helicopter. But now there's so many horror stories that goes on with these sorts of things. And do you advocate? I suppose it's kind of difficult for dissidents and all sorts of people who are in a difficult situation to set up a Monero node and make Monero transactions.
You don't need a node, though. I mean,
that's it. Do you do that? Do you encourage people to use like light wallets and whatnot to move money around, or?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is something where the benefits of a private base layer provide other side benefits. Like, because Monero is so private, by using someone else's node, the only thing that you're revealing is you're sending a transaction. If you're not using Tor or something like that, you're revealing your IP address, obviously, or your VPN's IP address or whatever. And in theory, depending on how you do it, you're revealing some information around like when you last synced your wallet, because you have to say like I want to update my wallet from block 260,000 to 270,000. So you do leak some information, but you're not leaking known outputs. You're not leaking amounts. You're not leaking who you're sending to, who you're receiving from, anything like that. None of that is known by the node. So I definitely would advocate using. There's only really one, what I would actually call a light wallet for Monero, and that's my Monero. And I generally stay away from it because to use the service, you have to give them your view key, which lets them see all of your incoming transactions.
Everything.
Which, I mean, again, then you're just at the still slightly better than Bitcoin privacy level. But that central entity does have a lot of information about your wallet, about when you spend funds, when you receive funds, that they don't have if you just use like a mobile wallet with a remote node. And I would still call that basically it's a full wallet, but you're using a remote node. And that's the situation I would generally recommend to people. It can require a lot of time to sync. But if you're creating a new wallet, it's basically instantaneous, and then just staying up to date isn't very costly as far as bandwidth or compute, anything like that. So you definitely don't have to run your own node, and I definitely would recommend that. I've heard a couple really great stories about people in authoritarian regimes using Monero and using it to avoid censorship. And I'm still chatting with one of them privately, so I want to wait to disclose that until I'm sure what he wants to share. Hopefully, you're going to write something up for my blog or somewhere else about it. This is in a
professional context.
It's not professional, but it's someone who I just don't want to reveal any info about without their permission. So I'll leave that behind the scenes. But there are definitely people using it in authoritarian regimes, and I think it's probably a lot less than people using Bitcoin, I would think, just because name recognition. I mean, most people around the world don't know what Monero is. But I would love to see a bigger push from the community to help dissidents and to help refugees and people who need a way to store wealth, transact, send money back home, that kind of thing. Give them a way to escape the surveillance that they're normally undergoing. I mean, normally they have serious privacy issues that are constantly surveilled and are tracked by the government that they're either a dissident against or fleeing from. And so something like Monero that allows them to have self-sovereignty, to remove the ability for the government to surveil their transactions, and that obviously has censorship resistance, is incredibly powerful. So I'd love to see more of that, especially as just the name recognition of Monero grows, and trust in the network grows. I think it's an ideal use. And as part of that, I would love to see community members throughout the world, especially when they're in places like the Middle East and Africa, where you have more authoritarian regimes and more things happening, run a node that you expose that other people can use, so that they don't have to rely on some random rich person in America to host a node. They can use something that's much more local, lower latency, more reliable, that kind of thing. So I would love to see more of that. There's definitely not as much use as I'm sure Bitcoin, that kind of thing, has, but I think it's a perfect fit for Monero for both wealth storage and transacting. So I would love to see more of that. And I think we've already seen a tide shift from Bitcoin to Monero for donations by privacy-oriented and FOSS projects. I've been compiling this in another post on my blog, but it's been really interesting to see a lot of projects shift from accepting Bitcoin only to accepting Bitcoin and a lot of altcoins, and then to adding Monero, and then slowly saying, like, just please donate Monero. Like, you save me headache, you save yourself headache. And it's been really cool to see that. And these are projects that are not, like, they're not cryptocurrency projects. They're just pro-privacy projects that see, hey, I can post a static Monero address and I can accept donations while preserving my privacy, the donor's privacy, and paying cheap fees as well, which cheap fees is something I don't want to harp on too much because that'll, like you said, that'll change as the network becomes more and more used. There are some things within how Monero was designed that should keep fees reasonable, but they will definitely rise. I mean, it's not tenable for them to be this low forever. But I think that's been a good shift to see, and I think we'll see more and more of that. I've cataloged a couple of those cases of people who are accepting donations getting attacked, being smeared on social media and on mainstream media because they received a donation from someone to their static Bitcoin address. And you can't reject a donation in Bitcoin. And I don't think a lot of the mainstream media and world understands how that works. So if you have a Bitcoin address posted publicly and someone that the world doesn't like sends you money, they can see that and you can't reject it. So you're just kind of screwed. And there are ways around that. You could run you could run BTC Pay server and generate new addresses for everybody, but that's a lot of overhead just to accept a donation. So it's been cool to see a lot of organizations switching to accepting Monero or accepting Monero proof payments, that kind of thing. And honestly, humanitarian aid organizations that generally are nonprofits that rely on donations, as there are crackdowns on different types of that, and there's more kind of political strife and issues around that, having the ability to accept donations, it gets tricky with them because normally for a nonprofit, because of tax laws and that kind of thing, you need KYC information. Essentially, you need to know who's donating to you. I'm not sure the legalities around completely anonymous donations that you don't know where they come from. I know with politicians and stuff that can cause problems, but I need to learn more about how NGOs and nonprofits work. But something like Monero opens up the door to truly anonymous donations and ways that they can also shift money into countries that are against the work that they're doing or that want to shut down the work that they're doing. They can use that to shift money around in a way that they could never do through the legacy banking system, or maybe through Bitcoin. I mean, normally you wouldn't be censored doing Bitcoin transactions, but you could be surveilled if you don't do things properly. And in the future, maybe you could be censored, but the surveillance could be a problem as well. So I'd love to see the use case of Monero grow in those kind of humanitarian situations, donations, more than just, I mean, right now we have every darknet market is Monero only. Generally now they're all shifting that way, which is a good litmus test of how the technology works. But obviously it's not really a good marketing point for anybody who's not cypherpunk, basically, because telling them that people are buying drugs on the internet with Monero that generally doesn't go over too well. But it's been a good litmus test, and I'd like to see more and more of a shift into truly everyone can appreciate the positive side of how Monero can impact people. So hopefully that'll continue to grow.
So what about the Zcash versus Monero from a privacy perspective?
Yeah. So from purely a privacy perspective, if you use Zcash properly, and I was talking about this with people on Twitter today because Snowden, who's super pro Zcash, came out today and again said Monero's fine, but Zcash is the better tool.
Let's go into this.
If you use it perfectly, it's a great tool. Zcash has really good privacy technology. It does so by making some trade-offs that a lot of people aren't comfortable with, like the trusted setup, which if the members who created the trusted setup at both, there were two different ceremonies, and essentially that's everyone comes together, creates a number, they each have a piece of how it was generated, and if they all destroy the piece, then everything's fine. But if they collude and keep the pieces of data that they use to generate this number, they could print infinite Zcash. And so that trusted setup exists in Zcash, and that trade-off allows them to use a different privacy protocol that, if used perfectly, and if used perfectly is basically you only use the shielded addresses within Zcash. So you can use Zcash in two ways, or three ways really. You can do just Bitcoin, T addresses is what they're called. It's just using Bitcoin. It's literally a Bitcoin fork. There's no differences really. There's no differences in privacy. That's the way that the vast majority of Zcash users use Zcash because that's the default. That's the way that most wallets default to using it. You can send from T addresses to Z addresses, which are the private address, and you leak a lot of metadata, but that's relatively private. You hide information about who you're sending to. Or the third way, and the optimal way, is you're sending from a shielded address to a shielded address, called like Z to Z is a lot of the time how it's referred to. And that provides really strong privacy guarantees. If used heavily, it can provide really good anonymity set sizes, and it hides a lot of data, similarly to how Monero hides it in concept, but in a way that provides a little bit more privacy on an individual transaction level. And so it's definitely it's a great tool if used properly. I think the core issues so far have been there's a corporation behind it. There's people trying to make money on it. There's a dev tax that they've been milking for a long time. They're getting a large...
Is it still there?
Yeah, they voted to keep it going. They, as in 40 people like, voted to keep it going.
Yeah, it's like 20%.
Yeah.
That dev tax is 20%.
Yeah, it was supposed to die out.
Nice.
They all got together and 40 people voted and kept it going to keep that cash cow going.
Yeah, and I'm sure they did separately destroy their shards of the initial.
Hopefully, I mean,
material.
The nice thing with the trusted setup, if one person destroyed it, it's theoretically sound. So you don't need everyone. Like if one person keeps it, it doesn't actually cause issues. So hopefully there's one person who's legitimate and destroyed it, and then in theory that protects things. But it's sketchy.
Let's build a world economy on that.
Exactly. And that's a trade-off that doesn't have to be made, and it's something they're trying to remove. Their next proposed protocol will remove the trusted setup because there have been some advances in cryptography that remove the need for it. So if they actually do that and they actually put it in place, that'll definitely be a big win. But the core problem has been they refuse to do privacy by default. From everything I see, it's just that they want to pander to regulators and exchanges and say, look, Zcash isn't very private.
That's what it comes down to.
You can list Zcash because it's just Bitcoin. Don't worry about it. And then there's the added privacy for the people who opt in. But it's been really interesting. One of the Monero community members, who's also very active in Zcash, he keeps up with the work that they're doing, and he's been involved in their community for a while. He runs numbers roughly every month about how many private transactions there are in Zcash versus Monero. And basically every month, 95+% of Zcash users don't have any privacy guarantees. They're not using shielded to shielded transactions. They're just using the normal T address, and then a small portion of those are using T address to Z address. So they're getting some privacy, but with a lot of leaked metadata. And that just comes down to this concept of, I mean, it's human psychology. When it's the default, what are most people going to use? They're just going to use the default. Like, yeah, they could opt in and get more privacy. And in theory, it's easy. I mean, it's easier in Zcash than it is within Bitcoin to get privacy. But still, you see 95% of people not opting into it. And because of this need to pander to regulators, Zcash hasn't implemented shielding by default, it's easy. They can just turn it on in a hard fork and be done with it. And then everybody who uses Zcash is fully private. And honestly, in that case, it would be a very strong competitor to Monero, and it would be a really good tool. I still would have all the questions around the dev tax and corporation behind it and a lot of the other stuff. But just for someone like you're just using it as digital cash, it would be a very strong tool. There's a lot of... They've also been very sly about marketing to try to find ways to talk about Zcash in a way that tricks people, in my opinion. They could be genuine, but that tricks people into thinking things about Zcash that aren't true. And so they've mislabeled a lot of things. Like, they talk constantly about zero-knowledge proofs, which is just this idea that you can prove something without providing any knowledge of what the thing is to the other party. And Zcash uses zero-knowledge proofs as part of ZK snarks, which is kind of the core of their privacy protocol. And it's a core piece, but Monero also uses zero-knowledge proofs. A lot of things use zero-knowledge proofs because they're just a really good way to prove data without revealing it. But they've used that marketing that zero-knowledge proofs are what make privacy perfect within Zcash. And I think they've just used a lot of language that is confusing, whether intentionally or not. It misleads a lot of people to not understand what actually matters when you're talking about a privacy protocol, which has been annoying to deal with. I think thankfully it's going down, whether they're just reducing the way they market things or people are learning what these terms actually mean. But a lot of times it's just using cryptography naming to confuse people into thinking that a protocol is better. And like I said, Zcash is a really good privacy protocol if you use it properly, or if they did shielded only transactions like Monero enforces. You have to use privacy within Monero. You can't opt out. You have to use it in a private manner. You can opt out by giving a view key to like a third party if you need to, but every time you publish a transaction to the blockchain, it's going to be private.
But that opting out is opting out into revealing data. It's not the default is privacy.
Yeah, exactly. And
which is the correct configuration to have. Yeah, it really is.
I mean, it's just like we've seen this shift from HTTP to HTTPS, and that's taken so long. I mean, we're really only now starting to get to the point where we can actually enforce HTTPS only. And I still run into issues daily where I hit sites that either force you to go through HTTP to HTTPS or don't have HTTPS. Like, it's still a problem because it's not the default, and there was no enforcement of a default.
I know, but like even HTTPS, it's just totally insufficient when it comes from like a security perspective in these networks. It's just the pipes. Secure the data, damn it, not the pipes, not the pipes. You just like if you want to get the data, you just attack the endpoints, right? Mm-hmm. And once I get into that, once I work my way through the seam, then I've got you. I've got you by the shortened curlies. Anyway, like this gets my peeve. This gets me going. This particular point.
I am 100% with you. As someone who worked in cybersecurity and is big on privacy, the flaws that exist at every level are terrifying, especially working in cybersecurity for a big company, just to see how, even on a team that was really good, to see how flawed the security of a company who spends millions of dollars every year on security is. Because, like you mentioned before, all of these base assumptions that we've made when building out the internet and when building out these tools, normally we just ignore privacy and we go, oh, we'll just build that on later. Or we ignore security and go, oh, we'll just build that on later. And you just have this cascading effect upwards through the application stack where these issues just come back to bite you. And then you have to try to fix them later. And then you try to, and then it's just, it's a nightmare.
One thing that Monero is susceptible to bloat, isn't it? You can't prune the chain.
Yeah, you can't. So this is something
wait. And now that we've got a new fucking blockchain called Chia,
oh god,
hard disks are going to become like insanely expensive. Thank you, Chia. It does absolutely nothing for green. Although it markets itself as green, it's just trash.
Environmentally friendly. Just ignore the massive pre-mine, the VC funded portions. Like, just ignore the corporation running it. It's environmentally friendly. Don't worry about it. Hard drives don't cost any power at all, and data centers full of storage racks. Yeah, they're not going to have any kind of monopoly there. But that's going to be a nightmare. There's just going to be the Ethereum GPU shortage for hard drives. Hopefully that just dies out quickly and we can get back to cheap SSDs, but
thanks, Cohen.
We'll see. So for Monero pruning, so it's a little bit nuanced. I think basically the way I understand it is you cannot prune the output set because obviously you don't have known spent outputs. So unlike Bitcoin, where you can say, I'm not going to store all of the outputs that have been spent in the past, I'm only going to store the set of known unspent outputs that I need today to create a transaction. You can massively prune down a Bitcoin node to be, I think, like a gig, 2 gigs at this point to hold the UTXO set. So it can be very small, very portable. You still, at that point, you're trusting other things, and if everyone ran a prune node, you can reconstruct the history of the chain. But you can prune very effectively within Bitcoin, and within anything that has a UTXO model, you can prune quite easily. In Monero, obviously, outputs are not known spent ever, except by the people who are spending them, obviously. But the network doesn't have the concept of known spent outputs. So you can't just prune away outputs that have been spent in the past. You have to keep outputs forever to use as decoys, and because you don't know if they're spent or not.
Oh,
So because of
that's
that,
a good point.
yeah, you can still prune away other data. And basically what you can do right now in Monero is it's more akin to sharding than pruning. You can get rid of 7/8 of the blockchain and then rely on remote nodes for the few times that you fall outside of the eighth of the blockchain that you have. Your node will reach out to other nodes to grab the decoy information that it needs to build a transaction locally. It's not really it all depends on how you define these words, but it's not really pruning in the sense of Bitcoin pruning, because again, you can't prune away the transaction set. But you can, a lot of pruning hasn't been explored as far as what extra data around the transactions can you prune while keeping enough of the data to build transactions in the future. So I'm sure there are ways that we could do better pruning or more efficient sharding, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, you always have that caveat of you don't know when outputs are spent, so you can't just delete everything that's a spent output. And there's not a way around that. And obviously it's a trade-off that has massive advantages because you never know an output is spent. So you can do things like ring sigs where you can say, I'm one of these 11, you don't know which one I am, and none of them are known spent. So I have a good little crowd to hide in. And then each of those have their own transactional history where they have 11 decoys. And as you go down this tree, it gets harder and harder to ascertain what path an output actually takes in the network. And that's how you get, it's a core piece of how you get fungibility within Monero. It's the core piece of how you get privacy. So there's obviously clear advantages to that. But yes, it does reduce the ability for people who run nodes to reduce the amount of storage needed. It's still, this is the first article that I wrote for my blog. It was something I'd been wanting to write about for a while. Was taking this idea of a reasonably private spend across blockchains and comparing how efficient each blockchain actually is when you try to use it in a private manner. Because a lot of people compare a regular Bitcoin transaction to a regular Monero transaction. But those are two very different things. A regular Bitcoin transaction is completely transparent. There's no coin join, there's nothing. It's completely deterministic. You can see exactly where it came from, exactly where it's going, the addresses on both ends, amounts, all of that. Which in some cases can be fine, but as we talked about a lot, that causes a lot of issues that permeate other areas. With a base Monero transaction, you get very strong privacy that protects sender, receiver, amounts. You get no known spent outputs on the network. You get fungibility. You get all of that. So you're comparing those two things is tricky because you're comparing two very different things. So I tried to take this concept of a reasonably private spend, which is what is the spend in Bitcoin when you've done the proper privacy techniques. And this specifically takes an input that goes into a Whirlpool round, so coin join within Samurai Wallet, the actual coin join round itself, and then a post-mix spend. So you have 3 transactions to actually perform a single private spend within Bitcoin. And how does that actually compare to Monero? And then I also compared Zcash within there. And I would definitely recommend giving it a read. I think it's a really fascinating look at trying to compare things that are dissimilar. But essentially, Bitcoin, you end up with about a 2,300 byte reasonably private spend. And you're paying a lot of money to get that spend through. I think on my blog, I estimate 50 sats per vbyte, which is low a lot of times these days. And it's still about $50, something like that. I need to go back and look. I try to keep it updated. But when you compare that to a Monero transaction is 1,400 bytes, so it's significantly smaller for stronger privacy than the initial Bitcoin reasonably private spend. And again, fees are tricky when you're comparing a completely saturated network with a not completely saturated network, but you're paying a median of 2 cents in Monero, where you're paying $41 for that private spend in Bitcoin. So I try to bring up this concept. So Zcash it's It's actually really comparable to Bitcoin in size. Bitcoin transaction is 2,363 bytes. Zcash is 2,373 bytes. So it's actually the largest transaction size among the three. But it's also about 2 cents per spend. They don't really have any mechanisms to reduce fees in the long run. It's Bitcoin, but forked. So they still have halvenings. They still have a fee reliance long term, all of that fun stuff. So they need to develop a very strong fee market, and quite quickly, because obviously they're nowhere near the market capitalization of Bitcoin.
That's a good point, eh? That's a good point. Yeah, without the decentralization, well, the initial, it's a done deal. It's dead. It's dead.
And then you think that 20% of the block subsidy right now is being taken by the dev tax too. So you have 20% less security at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a non-starter. These people need to get their shit together if they want to do something. But by that time, it's already gone.
In theory, the community could do something about it, but I don't think there doesn't really seem to be a very active Zcash community, except for the people who are kind of like at the top. I don't see a lot of that, so I'm not sure that there is a community that wants to change things drastically. But hopefully there is. Hopefully there's one that I don't see, and there's a lot of discussions going on and changes happening eventually. I hope to see that. There have been a couple forks of Zcash that do Z to Z only, so they do only shielded transactions. But they all have their own issues and are mostly just money grabs. So there's not a lot there.
Yeah. But one thing that's also quite nice in the Monero, did I discuss this with Ricardo? I can't remember if I discussed this or not, but maybe it might be worth going into, is how projects get funded in Monero. It's like, from a developer's perspective, it's a bit of a bitch. You've got these ideas that want to come on that bring value to the community, might bring value to the community, but it's difficult to get funding for them. But whereas in the Monero world, it sounds like there's a lot more of a legitimate process and something to feel optimistic about. Maybe you want to go into that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts about Monero. It's something that I fell in love with right away, and it's a community.
It's like Christmas presents, isn't it? It's like Christmas a few times a month. Yeah.
If you're someone who wants to do something for Monero and get paid, it's pure gold. It's an awesome system. So it's called the Community Crowdsourcing System. It's essentially a donations platform that lets people propose things for Monero. They go through an approval process where people can comment and say, hey, we should fund this, we shouldn't fund this. But at the end of the day, they go, assuming they don't have massive backlash at that point, they go up for funding, and the community gets to decide if they want to fund something or not. You get to decide if you want to fund something or not. And it's completely voluntary donations. There's no dev tax on Monero. There's no company behind it driving things. There's nothing like that. So it's just the community saying, hey, we approve of this, we want to see it get funded, and then people saying, hey, I'm going to donate my Monero to this person to help them to be able to do what they want to do. And everything that is done within Monero is done through this donations platform. Obviously, there are people who are building businesses on top of Monero that then they fund their own work, like wallet providers, like Cake Wallet, that kind of thing. They make money outside of the Monero protocol. They make money doing like exchanges within their wallet. But then they're also constantly giving back and donating to these causes, and it's a really cool system. It's not without its flaws. It's not a regular job, so you don't have like, if you want to do this as your full-time thing, you don't have benefits. You don't have like a sure payment in the future. You'll propose this thing for a certain amount of time. Normally they're pretty short, like 3 months ish would be kind of the longer side of things, to make sure that the community has a chance to kind of reassess and reorient and decide if they want to keep funding something. So if you want to do that full time, you're living on a weird 3-month kind of hope I get funded again schedule. And no one who has genuinely benefited Monero has not gotten refunded. Like everybody who's been influential in building out the protocol, everybody who's been building out good software on top of it, they always get funded again. I've never seen a proposal fail to get funded. But there's still that lack of surety that you would have if you had a regular day job with benefits and all that. But yeah, it's just great to see every time there's a proposal, like somebody who's not a developer at all has been writing up these weekly newsletters that just kind of go over news within Monero. They break down different things that are happening. They break down price, transaction volume, all of these kinds of things. And they put forward a proposal. It's open for funding right now, and people are donating to it because they like the newsletter that he's putting out. It makes it easy to keep up with the news within Monero, and so he's going to get funded by the Monero community to keep doing that. Yeah, it's a really fascinating system. It's one I wish more projects did, and it's interesting that Bitcoin doesn't have a core thing like that. I mean, they have a lot of companies that build on top of Bitcoin and then fund their own developers, and they have some side sponsorship platforms and stuff. But it's interesting that there's not something kind of central community driven like that for Bitcoin, or really for anybody else, as far as I know.
I wonder if maybe it's because Monero is so small and so tight, and it's just cypherpunk, sort of like, information is free kind of mentality. And that similar sort of model just cannot work on Bitcoin because there's so many different sorts of people that they just wouldn't get that idea. They just wouldn't get it.
Yeah, it would definitely be tricky. I mean, I guess the way that it works now within Bitcoin is probably how it would work in the future in Monero. You have disparate systems of funding people who want to work on it, and then those work themselves out. Like a company funds their own developers, and this platform allows you to fund people who you want to work on Bitcoin. But yeah, those things definitely, they get a lot harder at scale. So it'll be interesting to see how that grows with Monero. But right now it works really well. And it's so cool to see people donating their own funds to pay for other people to improve the thing that they love. It's really cool to see that, like, day in and day out. Hundreds of proposals, I'm sure, over the years have gone through and been funded. And like, there was a really cool one. There's a researcher who worked on Monero for I think the past 4 years, a little bit more than that now. And he's like a PhD level researcher and doing brilliant stuff. He built out a lot of the core protocol that Monero uses. And he's
the dude that came up with the bulletproofs, right?
Yeah, he was key in, well, he didn't come up with it. So that was proposed by like Andrew Polstra and other people on Bitcoin. But he actually built the implementation and built it out for how it would actually work within Monero. He was the key mind behind Ring CT, which was the way to bring confidential transactions to Monero. He created that whole concept and drove that. And there were others involved with that, but he was kind of a primary driver there. But it was cool to see, well, not cool to see that he got burnt out, but he got burnt out by that system. I mean, 4 years of unsure funding and working full time for Monero, I'm sure, take a toll on people. He got burnt out, needed some time off, and the Monero community came together and funded a proposal to give him a paid vacation. And people just chipped in. He didn't make the proposal. He had nothing to do with it. The community created the proposal, funded the proposal, and just sent him the funds and said, hey, enjoy a vacation. And that was just an awesome little piece.
Fucking hell! What is this dude's name?
His pseudonym is Sarang, Sarang. Sarang no
S-A-R. Okay, so he's probably anonymous, isn't he?
Yeah. He's a PhD researcher, and he's showed his face and stuff. So he keeps his identity.
So I don't think I'd be able to get him on as an interviewer.
No, I'm sure you could. He's come on lots of things. Yeah, there's like, for instance, there's a really cool series called Breaking Monero that the Monero community made that walks through flaws within the Monero community that either can't be fixed now or will always exist in a decentralized system. And it breaks down all the flaws, how you can fix them, that kind of thing, or how you can mitigate them for yourself. And he was a key part of that. So he's shown up in that. He's been in lots of interviews, that kind of thing.
Okay.
He's still kind of behind the scenes now, kind of coming back from that vacation and time off, and he's just started to do some work for Monero again. So I'd be curious if he'd be willing to jump on. But yeah, he's a great guy, brilliant. He's dedicated so much of his life to building out great privacy tools, and he's contributed so much to the ecosystem as a whole. I mean, it's not just Monero. He's built out these tools that could be put in place on Bitcoin, that could be put in place in other areas, and that have also just advanced cryptography in general. So it's really cool to see someone like that who's spent that time working on Monero, and then see the Monero community reward him with a paid vacation against his will.
No, I just find that so like touching to hear that, because I've been involved in cryptocurrency communities of different sorts, where the developers get treated like dogs, like absolute, just animals, and I was just, how is it that these people can, anyway? But so like hearing this really lovely, touching story of the developers actually being treated nicely. It's quite nice. It's quite good to hear that. Let's go into how you got into IT. Let's go a little into yourself as a background. You can reveal as much information as you wish to. I take it that you're on the latitude, the longitude of Seattle. It's got to be
East Coast, but close. America still.
Yeah. So you grew up in that part of the world, all spent all your time there, or?
Most of it, yeah. I mean, I moved around a lot growing up. I've traveled overseas quite a bit, both in my childhood and in my career so far. So I thankfully have gotten to see a lot of the world. I love Asia. I'd love to live in Asia or move out there a lot more. I've really enjoyed it.
Where in Asia?
My favorite place was definitely Japan. I went to Tokyo for work for a couple weeks and loved it.
I love Japan.
Been to Hong Kong, been to Shanghai, been to Singapore. I loved Singapore. Really nice city. Gorgeous.
It's a bit sterile.
It is.
There's always a competition between Hong Kong and Singapore.
Really?
We're better than Singapore.
I will say I like Singapore more, but don't shoot.
Well, you've just been degraded.
Now you're not going to hear the episode. I could feel it. To be fair, when I went to Hong Kong, was on the tail end of a 3-week trip to Tokyo and then to Hong Kong, working 80-hour weeks. So that was it was the tail end of a really rough trip. So that's probably the main reason I didn't love Hong Kong. But I'd love to go back.
You have to come out again then.
Yeah, I'd love to go back. Then.
Yeah, we've got a nice little community. We'll slot you right in there. If you'd like a few, did you ever get out to Thailand or Vietnam and places like this, or just was the more advanced cities?
I haven't yet. Mostly the advanced cities, just because all those trips were work trips to Asia. So they were more cities where we had a presence. But I'd love to get out to really either Thailand or Vietnam. I'd love to just explore more of Asia. I feel I really connect with a lot of the Asian culture. I really like interacting with people in Asia. I've had lots of really fun chats and interactions, and I just love to explore more. Oh yeah, I love the food. I mean, travel is 90% food, 10% doing stuff. So
that's true. That's so true.
All about that food. Oh man, I could eat in Tokyo forever. Just ramen every day. Gyoza. Yeah. So good.
I remember walking into one of these. What are they called? Ichibayas. I forgot what they were. When you sort of walk in and then everybody sort of greets you. Konbanwa. Something like that. They all shout at the same time. I was like, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? I sort of drop my bags kind of thing, and they're all sort of laughing. Oh, this gaijin doesn't know what's going on. Oh, it was fun. And also, did you ever do the capsule hotel room things?
I did not.
The coffin things. Yeah.
I would be interested to try it. One of the nice parts about traveling with the big company that I worked for is they put me up in really nice hotels. So I was more than happy to stay at the 4 or 5 star hotels on their dime. It was great.
Ooh, fancy.
Yeah. In Hong Kong, I stayed at a hotel. I don't remember the name, but it's right on the water. They had breakfast every day, dumpling, shumai, so much good food. Just devour the breakfast every day. It's horrifyingly expensive, but I stayed within the limits that the company set. I just spent most of it on breakfast because it was so good.
Well, there's good news. During the COVID times, a lot of these hotels are on massive discounts. So, obviously we can't travel now. So what we do is we do these bloody staycations, and we pretend we're in Laos or Thailand or something. We're okay, let's go.
I was thinking a staycation in America is a little different because it's such a massive, broad country. You can do a ton of stuff. But a staycation in a city state like Hong Kong is probably a little bit.
It's pathetic.
Probably a little bit lackluster. Drive to the other side of town and have a staycation.
Oh fuck! It's so bad. It's so bad. Well, we went to Discovery Bay. You should probably know Discovery Bay is like in one of the islands on sort of the outside of things, and they got a hotel there, and at least you can pretend.
You feel
It's
like
a
you're
lot
somewhere
better.
else, at least. Yeah, you can still see your
Yes,
house,
yeah.
but you feel like you're somewhere else.
Well, not quite, but yes, yeah, kind of. I mean, we can't even go to Macau without the whole drama of fucking quarantines and whatnot. Yeah, but you guys have had like a bit of a. Are you in Los Angeles? Not Los Angeles, California.
No,
The
East
states
Coast,
of California.
but
Okay,
more
that
on
whole
the
area.
more on the southern end. So it's been a little bit more relaxed,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Yeah, are you guys coming right with your situation in COVID? Because I know that California was doing some crazy ass stuff. I mean, like getting very, very authoritarian and stuff.
Yeah, they've been feeling some authoritarian nightmares for sure with all of their policing and shutting down people and just gathering in their own homes and shutting down churches and yeah, lots of crazy stuff. Thankfully, the southern part of the U.S. is a little bit more relaxed. It's
Like
a very
Texas,
different
right?
story.
You're referring to Texas.
Texas, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, like all those southern states are generally a bit more conservative, which normally means they're a little bit more relaxed and have relaxed mask mandates a lot more. And most people, it's really interesting. Like if you go into a city, you see everyone hyper vigilant about masks, like super cautious, super scared. And then you go outside the city and everybody's like, whatever, like I'm not at risk. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. Like I'm not gonna waste 2 years of my life because of this. It's interesting to see that kind of paradigm shift between the two parts of America, because really rural America is so much different than urban America. It's a whole different world. But yeah, thankfully the South has been pretty relaxed. It's been interesting to watch the stats for the states that have no mask mandates or lowered mask mandates not be worse than the states that are authoritarian about it. I know that's a hot topic, but
Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't realize. No, in America, it seems to be like everything is turned to 11, and purely just to get like attention.
oh yeah,
That's sometimes I get that feeling, but from an international perspective, that's you get the sort of what I just mentioned. But when you actually go to America, it's quite a different situation. On the boots on the ground is quite different. When you meet folks out there, I went to Champaign-Urbana, which is like Illinois.
yeah.
Where else? I went to St. Louis to go see the solar eclipse.
Oh, nice.
That was so much fun. It was so much fun. The people there are pretty cool. Actually, I really like them. They're really cool. They're really sort of laid back, and they don't really give a shit about things.
Yeah, America's this weird
Have you ever
dichotomy.
been-
Like, there's so much pumped up in like mainstream media, and I'm sure in international media too, that makes it seem like this like crazy place. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, when you
With
actually
Trump
get down
and
to
all,
meet
yeah.
people and hang out, and it's a very different place. Especially, I mean, and I prefer being outside the cities more in America. I feel like people are a lot more inviting and genuine and kind and relational, and had a lot more enjoyable experiences outside of main cities and in the South too as well. I think it's a little bit more relaxed, but it's a very different place. And even depending on where you go in the U.S., it's totally different. Go to one state, go to another state. It's a whole different world. So it's weird to have I'm sure as someone who's living in a small place like Hong Kong, it's very different going into the U.S. where someone in North Carolina is living a totally different life than someone in California and has different things around them and different chains and different politics, local politics, and there's a lot of variance within America.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I was in Boulder, Colorado. There's a lot of scientific research that goes on in that area, and I was at NIST to go take a look at some of there was an ion trap conference. I popped on over to that for 5 days. It was absolutely fantastic. But Boulder, Colorado, man, like some massive, beautiful mountain range. You get on your mountain bikes and just it's such a pleasant experience out there, and people are so sort of chilled and laid back. And then you think about like what goes on in California. Yeah, it's just yeah, I see what you mean. One place I would like to go to is I'd like to go to Texas for some reason. This has never really sort of like been on my mind, but I find it interesting that like everybody sort of like walks around with guns. This is the impression I get, and I don't know if it's true, but I mean, everybody seems to walk.
If you're outside the cities, it's probably relatively true. I mean, probably most people are concealed carrying at the least, and you'll probably see open carry. And I mean, people aren't like walking around with rifles and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely really? It's a very different culture in the South. Why? I love Texas.
But why? Yeah, it's a really good place. Why do they need guns everywhere?
For some people, it's just personal protection. I mean, concealed carry is a great way to carry away to protect yourself in case of robbery or carjacking.
No,
people. Yeah, people. Okay. Yeah, it's just a way to keep yourself safe and be able to handle situations you wouldn't be able to handle otherwise. And then, I mean, but really, the vast majority of people who own guns, they just own guns because they're fun. Like, I love guns. I own multiple. I love shooting them. It's just a really fun hobby and sport. There's a lot of variants. Like, you can have tons of different types of guns, ammunition, build your own guns, buy pre-made ones. It's just a really cool hobby.
So and I mean, there's also market.
Oh yeah, a massive market. Yeah, gun sales are huge in the U.S. And I mean, the other piece too is hunting. Hunting is really popular in the U.S. Really all across it. So a lot of people have guns just to be able to go hunting every season. Deer hunting, turkey.
Do you go hunting?
I never have. I want to. I love guns. Okay. Good shot. I like staying up on that, but I've never actually gone hunting so far. But
so do you do it for more like accuracy stuff, or do you have like a rifle that?
Yeah, just shooting at ranges mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully, I'd love to have enough land one day that I can just shoot in my backyard. That'd be the goal, so I don't have to worry about going to a range or paying for a membership fee or something. But yeah, mostly just accuracy training with it so that I'm proficient in case kind of shit hits the fan, that kind of thing.
Oh God! So you all want to be Navy SEALs?
I understand. I am not a Navy SEAL. I don't have those kind of fantasies. But I want to. If I'm gonna use something that could kill somebody, I want to make sure that I know what I'm doing with it, and that I'm safe and I can handle it properly, and that when I do it with other people, I mean, I love shooting with family members, with my wife, because it's a ton of fun. I want to make sure that I'm proficient in the thing that I'm going to be doing.
That terrifies me. Absolutely terrifies me. And I'm like, oh my God, oh Jesus, going to America, like I would be looking around. Okay, I come from South Africa where people carry guns and whatnot, and I look for the bulges or for knives and guns, and I avoid those places because it's one of the main reasons why I'm here in Hong Kong. Because here I walk around, I can be drunk on the streets at 3:00 in the morning, and I know nothing's going to happen to me. A woman could be drunk on the streets at 3:00 in the morning, and I know nothing's going to happen to her. The probability is extremely, extremely low. But I don't know about America. Like, if I'm drunk on the streets, 3:00 in the morning, maybe I'm a bit stroppy. I don't know. Maybe I end up with a bullet in my head.
I think it's a common misconception. I think when you come from a culture that isn't as kind of gun friendly as America, and really, I mean, I'm more talking about rural America. Like, if you go to cities in America, that's going to be much more rare. I mean, there's probably going to be people who are concealed carrying, but you'll never know it. No one's going to open carry, nothing like that. So it would be much more tame, and you wouldn't even know that it's a thing in cities. But if you're in rural areas, I mean, yeah, a lot of people are concealed carrying. Some will open carry, that kind of thing. But you have to think the people who do that, there are bad people who do that, I'm sure. But by and large, the people who do that are people who are going to the range every week, who are spending tons of time with it, who are very proficient in gun handling. They're proficient, hopefully, in self-defense in other ways. So if something happens, they don't have to just resort to using a gun. But it's not as scary as it sounds. Both guns aren't as scary as they sound, and the people who own them and use them for self-defense aren't that scary. There's a very much a culture of it's a last resort. And there's tons of laws around it as well. And this is one of the good use cases for laws and regulation. If you shoot somebody, even if it's perfectly self-defense, and even if there's easy evidence that nothing happened that was like askew or weird, you're still going to go to prison. and they're going to investigate things. They're going to go through a whole trial process. There's going to be a ton of checking to make sure that it was a legitimate use of self-defense. And different states have different laws, but there's a lot of things that go around it in the culture of how to handle guns, of how to handle a gun in self-defense. There's a lot of training in order to get like a concealed carry permit. You have to go through a long course. You have to prove you're proficient on the range. You also then are giving up all your info to the government saying, I own a gun and I'm using it for self-defense. So you also have some other issues where, like, if you get stopped by a policeman and you're concealed carrying, you have to announce it right away. You have to make it clear where the gun is. Like, there's a lot of legislation and regulation around how it can be used. And even using it in self-defense, you have to be very cautious that you're doing it and it's necessary and it's the only way out. Like, it needs to be a clear situation of, this was the only way I was going to survive this moment, and I used it in self-defense. And I think that's normally the way people approach it. I'm sure there are bad eggs just like there are in everything else, but I feel much more safe knowing that someone has their concealed carry and goes shooting regularly and understands how to use that than I would if neither of us had a concealed carry or a weapon. Because there are other situations, I mean, hopefully nothing ever happens, but there are other situations where someone gets road rage, they smash your car, you pull out to figure out license information, and they just run at you with a baseball bat or something. Or those situations where, like, it happens, and obviously that's never happened to me. I've never been in those situations, but it's good to have a way to defend yourself in those situations. And I like that that's an option. But obviously it's one that there needs to be a lot of due diligence, and people need to be properly trained if they're going to be able to carry a weapon for self-defense and all that jazz.
Now, what about your cops? Because, like, on an international stage, when we look at American cops, I must admit it looks quite scary what's going on there. I have a question now. Why do people always run away from the cops? When the cops want to arrest you, you just get down on your fucking knees and just get down and just. Why do people run away? Because it's a great way to get shot.
Exactly.
Great way to get shot.
Exactly. Like, I think there's two.
Sorry. As a foreigner, when I look at this, it's like even I can see that if I am a trained, even I'm not that well trained a cop, like those dudes, like if you're going to start running away, you're not listening to what I'm saying. And the probability of you carrying a concealed gun is maybe high, and I'm going to go home to my family no matter what. And if you suddenly turn around, dude, you could have a weapon on you.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you can expand to me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm opening up a hornet's nest. I don't know what I'm doing.
Definitely a hornet's nest, but I'll dive into the hornet's nest a little bit. I think it's kind of a twofold problem. I think there are definitely legitimate concerns with the militarization of the police. There's a lot of misuse of access to military equipment and a lot of kind of more authoritarian shift in how police can operate and how the government uses police. And I think we've seen a lot of that with everything since, like, I'm sure you heard the January 6th kind of Capitol raid on the Capitol, the stuff that happened there, that crazy day. After that, we've seen a lot more of that ramping up, security around the Capitol all the time, like a lot of stuff there. And I think that trend has not helped instill belief and trust in the police. But I think for me, by far the main driver is people in mainstream media and politicians and influential people trying to use police violence as a way to gain a platform. And there are definitely issues with police violence. There are definitely issues with racism that have happened. There have obviously been really bad cases of that. And there has been lots of issues with racism in our country for many years. But that said, I think a lot of the problem is mainstream media and politicians really trying to use that as a weapon to increase their political power and increase their political capital. And what that does, when you instill in people the idea that the police are bad and they're out to get you and they'll shoot you, especially when you hype up cases of police violence and you talk about them more and you don't give proper kind of due diligence before talking about cases and that kind of thing. I think you you end up with a lot of people who are fearful of the police when they shouldn't be necessarily. And in some cases, you should be fearful of the police. Like I said, there have been lots of cases of police abuse, but I don't think that's rampant or like the norm. But when you instill in people this idea that the police are out to get you and they're constantly shooting people and that they want to use deadly force whenever they can, I mean, what are you going to do if you believe that the police are trying to kill you or want to kill you and they're arresting
away,
you? You're probably going to run away or resist arrest. And I mean, if that is true, that that's happening, then yeah, that's probably the safest bet. Just try not to be there. But I think it's not as systemic as people talk about, and so there's this false fear that's created, and it leads to a lot more people getting killed by police, and it leads to a lot more police getting killed by people, because people are fearful and hateful towards the police because of things that have happened and things that they've been told have happened that maybe didn't happen the way they've been told. And then police are obviously on edge because they know that people think that they're out to get them. Police are getting gunned down in the streets too. People are doing drive-bys on police, killing them, and it just creates this ever-building circle of mistrust. And so you have those cases where people, you're like, hey, just like, you're getting pulled over because your taillight's bad and he's frisking you. Like, maybe just stand there and let him do what he needs to do and go on your way with your traffic ticket or whatever. And people run because they're scared of the police, and then the police are on edge because they're scared of people shooting them. So the guy runs and puts his hand in his waistband, and maybe he has a gun, maybe he doesn't. You don't know as the policeman. There's a lot of nuance there. I mean, I don't want to get super political, but there's a really good channel called Donut Operator on YouTube. I think he has really insightful information about police violence. He like breaks down the body cam footage from incidents with the police. He breaks down a lot of ideas with how police operate as an ex-policeman himself. And so I've learned a lot.
That's
from
quite
that.
useful, I think.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Because there's one thing. My mum of 78 years old, we got on a call, and she was like, "Do you know what happened in America?" She's a great fan of following what goes on in America, and she really doesn't like Trump. But every time our conversation was always Trump would be involved in there. I don't know why she was so obsessed. Anyway, there was a situation of cops telling a soldier, a guy, a dude in camouflage, to get out the car, and this soldier was like, he had his hands out the thing, and he's like, I don't want to put my hands inside, because if as soon as I do that, you're going to shoot me. Like, these are both peacekeeping forces. They're different peacekeeping forces, and one of them, and the police had 2 cops with guns trained on that fella. Whatever you guys are doing, it's wrong. Whatever's happened there, that the 2 peacekeeping forces are the dude's got what? How did that? Do you know what I'm talking about? This particular story.
I haven't heard about that case specifically. I mean, there's been a lot of really messy cases.
He got maced in the face eventually, and he was like I'm some sort of lieutenant or something. I don't know what he was.
Yeah, no, I don't know what happened with that one. I think the main thing I will add is, in any of these situations where you hear something, someone's telling you there's police violence or there's this kind of cases happening, just do your own research. I think almost every time where I take the time to dig in, and I'm in the U.S., so I'm speaking more to people in the U.S. who this affects daily or regularly, but and you can too, just so you can have a more accurate view of what's going on. But just review the facts. There's almost always body cam footage that's released later. There's almost always police statements and eyewitness statements that are released later that you can look at and see what actually happened. Because normally the way that people are seeing these things is they're seeing the viral 10-second clip that has no context and just shows someone getting shot down, and you have no idea what happened before, after, why that was happening. And a lot of times once you learn the context, you learn why the police had their guns drawn, why they were coming at this person aggressively. Normally when there's like a traffic stop, the cop's never going to pull his gun, nothing like that. But if maybe you have a warrant out for your arrest and they know that you're violent, or they're there because there's a domestic abuse complaint, or there's a lot of scenarios where the context builds a platform for you to actually figure out what's actually going on. And a lot of people just don't take the time to dig into what's actually going on. And I just So yeah, just say whatever you believe and whatever you think is true. If don't let people persuade you with no context and short clips of video. Just do your own research later. And that's what I like about this guy, Donut Operator on YouTube. He waits to put out any content until the information is out, until he has context, has police reports, till he has body cam footage. He waits until he can put together a comprehensive picture of what happened as far as he can tell from what's public, and then try to figure out, like, why did the police do this? Why did the person do this? What actually happened in this interaction? And there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And some of the cases are just terrible, and they're awful. They're racist, or they're angry, violent cops, or they're people who are trying to pull guns on cops. And there's a lot of situations that are just bad, but there's also a lot of situations that get spun up to be a lot worse than they actually were in reality. And a lot of times it was completely justified and makes sense when you know what was actually happening. So it's tricky. That's very much a political can of worms, especially in the U.S. That's constant debate, but yeah.
How's Biden coming along now? While we're on a political front, how's Biden coming along? Have you guys all settled down now? Are you more happy with this dude?
I don't know that many people are happy, but some people are happy. I don't know. The country is incredibly divided. Yeah. If nothing else, money printer go burr. That is definitely happening. Ugh, they love their printing. Inflation is going to be nightmarish. I'm glad I have some cryptocurrency and have some way to opt out of that system. It's pretty incredible.
If you look at all the countries, like at 2020, all the countries across the world just go poof. They just start breaking away on the amount of money that they're printing. Turkey is unbelievable. Erdogan has gone absolutely insane. He's printed the shit out of his currency. He's turned the currency into a toilet paper, and basically banned Bitcoin because people are turning to Bitcoin in the droves. So and not only that, but he's also the kind of fellow that alienates himself from people that help him. He asks people to help him, and then he talks behind their back and talks shit about them, and then they turn their back on him, and then now he's got nobody. So it's like, yeah, the people in Turkey they're done for. They're done for.
Seems like a really bad situation. I mean, it's crazy how much impact that kind of economic control can have. I mean, everyone always thinks like that can never happen here, but it keeps happening in other countries. It could happen in the U.S. It could happen in South Africa. It could happen in Hong Kong. Like, if things progress, it's certainly a possibility. Hopefully, it never happens. I never wish that on anyone. I don't want a country to suffer from hyperinflation just to prove the point of Bitcoin or Monero or anything like that. But hopefully, I think it has been a wake up call for a lot of people. Just to give them the chance to go, something's wrong here. Like, maybe we need a way to opt out of this. And I think it's opened a lot of eyes. At least in my circles, I've heard a lot of people talking about things that would never have been talked about before COVID hit and inflation happened and money printer go burr.
There's an element of there's a side of me, the darker side of me, that's saying, am I going to be seeing cannibalism with my own eyes? Really?
Escalated quickly.
Like there's, that escalated quickly. No, there's a side of me that's actually thinking this, because like we already know what happens when a country goes to shit. We know, like, okay, Ukraine was a different story with Stalin, because Stalin just basically took all the resources, all the food out of there, and sent Ukraine into this massive famine. Millions upon millions of Ukrainians died. Cannibalism was a survival strategy, basically. You'd eat your dead brother, kind of thing. And we've gotten very dark. I'm sorry about that.
Things went downhill quickly. No, I mean, there are a lot of big negative results if you destroy an economy. That's the way things work.
Yeah, exactly. So the penetration of cryptocurrency, of Bitcoin, and all these things is nowhere near is what needed. But the thing is that maybe adoption could really go quickly if that's the case. I don't know.
I hope so.
Anyway,
I mean, I've heard some tale of these countries that are having hyperinflation seeing demand for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies go through the roof because it's the only way to opt out, really. And I think especially for something that's usable as a method of exchange as well, there's a lot of value in having a way to not only store wealth, but also transact in and out of your country or the country that your family's still in, because a lot of times families get separated. Some flee, some stay. So having ways to be able to transact in and out and avoid capital controls and censorship, that there's a lot of value there. I think if this train continues going the way it seems to be going, I think a lot of people will hopefully wake up. I mean, we can't make them, and I don't want to see people suffer because of that, but hopefully people will wake up and kind of keep an eye and ear open and stay open to the idea of opting out into something else. And cryptocurrency is really about it, specifically Bitcoin and Monero.
Yeah. Right. What else? What else is there? What else can we sort of go into? Not much. We sort of touched on a good few subjects. We've gotten to go nicely political. Anything else? How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, probably the main way is Twitter or Matrix. I'm on Matrix quite often, keeping up with Monero community and other privacy-focused communities of the projects. All of my contact info is on my blog, sethsimmons.me. And then if you go to About Me, you'll see different ways to contact me there. I can also share them with you later if you want to include them in show notes or anything. But yeah, I mean, most of the content I put out will be either Twitter or my blog. And if I put out anything on my blog, obviously I'll share it on Twitter as well. So the easiest way to just keep up with what I'm doing is follow on Twitter. But if you want to chat one-on-one, I'm always open to that.
Excellent. Seth, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for holding my hand through this privacy debacle.
Oh, it's fun. I love this format. Just more relaxed conversation and seeing where it ends up.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful for me and hopefully for the viewers too to be able to learn a little bit and learn a bit more about each of us too. It's fun.
Excellent, mate. And next time I'm on the East Coast, beers.
Heck yeah.
And you take me to the shooting range.
Yeah. I'll show you. It's fun. It's not daunting. It's fun.
I don't know, bro. I don't know. Have you got one of those like Magnum 45s or whatever?
I have reasonable guns. Mostly, like I have an AR-15 that I built. It's really fun.
Oh, shit.
I know, but it has this picture from the media that makes it seem like this terrifying, daunting thing. But it's really just a really fun gun to
cinemas and shoot people up.
That's what every AR-15 owner does. So, yeah. You got it. You got the narrative. You got it down pat.
Oh, dude. Okay, man. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Seth.
It was fun. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.